The roses began appearing on the 13th night of autumn. Eleanor Ashford discovered the first at dawn, its petals black as morning silk and wet with something darker than dew. She had knelt on the crumbling stone threshold of her late grandmother's cottage, the hem of her nightgown soaking through with cold moisture, and touched one fingertip to the crimson stain pooling at the stem's base. Blood. Fresh enough that the scent of copper mingled with the earthy perfume of decay rising from the forest floor. Fresh enough that it hadn't yet begun to brown at the edges. She should have thrown it away. Should have bolted the door and written to her cousin in London, begging for passage back to the city's gaslit streets and rational explanations. Instead, she had carried the rose inside and placed it in a glass of water on the kitchen sill, watching throughout the day as sunlight failed to penetrate the unnatural darkness of its petals. By the second week, there were 7 roses. By the third, she had stopped counting. Now, Eleanor stood in the doorway with a candle guttering in her hand, its flame bending toward the forest as though pulled by invisible strings. October wind carried the taste of coming snow and something else, a whisper that wasn't quite sound, a presence that pressed against her skin like velvet dragged the wrong way. The latest rose lay across the threshold, larger than the others. Perfect. And still dripping. "Show yourself," she said to the darkness beyond the candlelight's reach. Her voice emerged steadier than she felt, honed by too many nights speaking to the dying in her grandmother's stead. "I know you're watching." The forest held its breath. Even the wind stilled. Then footsteps, not the crack of breaking twigs or the rustle of disturbed leaves, but the whisper of boot leather against stone, as though he had been standing on the path all along and she simply hadn't possessed the eyes to see him. He emerged from shadow the way ink bleeds, through water, darkness condensing into the shape of a man. No, not a man. Something wearing a man's form the way she might wear her grandmother's too large cloak, elegant but not quite natural, tall enough that he had to duck slightly beneath the cottage's overhanging eaves, dressed in black that seemed to absorb what little light her candle offered. His face remained obscured, features lost in the interplay of moonlight and shadow, but she could feel the weight of his attention like a physical thing. "You should not be here," he said. His voice belonged to cathedrals and crypts, low, resonant, carrying centuries in its cadence. "This place is no longer safe for your kind." Eleanor's fingers tightened on the candlestick. "My kind?" The living. The flame between them suddenly flared, and in that brief illumination she glimpsed his face. Pale as marble, beautiful in the way that ancient statues were beautiful. Cold, perfect, utterly inhuman. Eyes like winter itself, silver gray, and ancient, holding depths that made her breath catch in her throat. Then darkness returned, and she wondered if she had seen him at all. "The roses," she managed. "You've been leaving them. A warning." He took a single step forward, and she caught the scent of him rain, and old stone, and something underneath it all. Something that made her pulse hammer in her wrists and throat. "You must leave before the new moon. Return to civilization, Miss Ashford. This forest remembers hungers older than your god." He knew her name. The realization should have frightened her more than it did. "I buried my grandmother 3 weeks ago," Eleanor said quietly. "This cottage, her books, her medicines, they're all I have left. I won't be driven from my home by superstition and—" She gestured at the blood-stained rose. "Theater." Something flickered across his expression. Surprise, perhaps. Or something that might have been respect in a creature capable of such things. He moved closer, near, enough now that she could see the unnatural stillness of his chest, the way he existed in the space between heartbeats like a held breath. "Then you are a fool," he said softly. "Or brave. I have not yet decided which. Why warn me at all?" The question emerged before wisdom could stop it. "If this place is so dangerous, why not simply let me die?" The word fell between them like a stone into still water. "Because you tend the graves in the old cemetery. Because you leave offerings of bread and milk at the forest's edge, as your grandmother did. Because you have shown respect to things the world has forgotten." His head tilted, an oddly predatory gesture. "And because I gave my word, long ago, that I would protect those who honored the old pacts." Thunder rumbled in the distance. The storm had been building all evening, and now the first drops of rain began to fall, hissing against the candle flame. "I don't understand," Eleanor said. "What pacts? What are you?" He smiled then, a terrible, beautiful expression that held no warmth at all. "Come dawn. You will convince yourself this was a dream. You will rationalize the roses as the work of some lovesick village boy, and my warning as the product of exhaustion and grief." He turned as though to leave, darkness already beginning to claim him. "But when the nightmares start, when you wake to find symbols carved in your doorframe and taste ash on your tongue, remember that I offered you escape." Wait, but he was already gone, dissolved back into shadow as though he had never been. Only the rose remained, black and bleeding on her threshold, and the lingering scent of rain and stone and ancient things. Eleanor stood motionless in the doorway, candle trembling in her grip, as the storm finally broke overhead. Lightning illuminated the forest in stark relief, twisted trees and overgrown paths, and, just for an instant, the pale figure of a man standing at the tree line, watching her with eyes that reflected light like an animal's. Then thunder cracked, and when her vision cleared, she was alone. She should go inside, bar the door, pray. Instead, Eleanor bent and lifted the rose, thorns biting into her palm hard enough to draw blood. The pain was sharp and real and grounding. In the morning, she would examine it in daylight and find some rational explanation. In the morning, she would laugh at her own superstitious terror. But tonight she carried the rose inside and added it to the others, now numbering 23 in their mismatched glasses and vases, a garden of darkness blooming in her grandmother's kitchen. And when she finally slept, she dreamed of silver eyes and a voice like winter asking, "What are you willing to sacrifice for truth?" The answer, she discovered upon waking to find a symbol carved in her door, ancient and protective, and absolutely impossible to dismiss, was simple and terrifying. Everything. The symbol burned, not with fire, though Eleanor had spent the morning's first hour pressing her palm against it as though flesh could smother whatever sorcery made the carved wood radiate heat. It burned with presence, with meaning, with the weight of something that insisted upon being seen despite every rational instinct screaming at her to ignore it. She traced the spiral pattern with trembling fingers, 3 circles intertwined, each containing glyphs she didn't recognize but somehow understood. Protection, warning, invitation. The contradictions made her head ache. Old wives' tales, her grandmother used to say, grinding herbs in her mortar while Eleanor took notes on treatments and dosages. That's what the village calls my knowledge. But every tale has roots, child. Every superstition grew from seed of truth. Eleanor had believed her grandmother was speaking metaphorically. Now, staring at the impossible symbol carved into ancient oak, while roses black as sin wilted on her kitchen table, she understood that some truths were too strange for daylight's harsh illumination. The church bells tolled 10. She had patience to visit old Thomas with his failing lungs, the Miller girl recovering from fever, Widow Blackwood who'd been asking after tonics for her rheumatism. Normal concerns. Human problems with human solutions. She pressed her forehead against the scarred door, breathing in the scent of wood and rain, and something underneath it all that smelled like winter. This place is no longer safe for your kind. His warning echoed in her bones. Eleanor straightened, squared her shoulders, and stepped across the threshold into morning light that seemed too bright, too ordinary for a world that contained symbols and blood-stained roses and men who moved like living shadows. The forest pressed close around her grandmother's cottage, too close, she noticed now, as though the trees had inched forward in the night. Branches reached toward the windows like gnarled fingers. Roots buckled the stone path that led to the village. Road. Even the birdsong sounded muted, as though the woods themselves were holding their breath. She hurried down the path, medical bag clutched against her ribs, trying not to think about silver eyes watching from the darkness. The village materialized from morning mist like something half-remembered. Thornhaven had stood at the forest's edge for 300 years, its stone buildings and slate roofs weathered to a uniform gray that matched the autumn sky. Once, it had been prosperous, a way station for travelers crossing the mountain pass, home to merchants and craftsmen, and the kind of bustling life that filled market squares with laughter. Now barely 100 souls remained. The young had fled to cities, promising progress and gaslight and futures that didn't taste like ash. Those who stayed were too old, too stubborn, or too poor to leave. Or, Eleanor thought, as she passed the boarded-up inn and empty blacksmith's forge, they knew something about leaving that kept them rooted, in place despite the slow decay. Miss Ashford, Sarah Miller emerged from the general store, her daughter Alice wrapped in shawls despite the mild temperature. "I was hoping you'd come. Alice's fever broke yesterday, but she's been having the most peculiar dreams." "Hush, Mama." Alice, 12 and far too serious for her age, fixed Eleanor with eyes that seemed to see through skin to something underneath. She already knows about the dreams, don't you, miss? Cold crawled down Eleanor's spine. What kind of dreams, Alice? The girl leaned closer, lowering her voice to a whisper. About the man in the forest, the one who doesn't breathe. He says the boundary is weakening and we need to choose sides before the new moon. Or she stopped, small face crumpling. Or something hungry will choose for us. Sarah pulled her daughter back, forcing brightness into her voice. Fever dreams, nothing more. Children imagine such things when they're ill. But her hands shook as she adjusted. Alice's shawls, and her gaze kept darting toward the forest looming beyond the village's edge. Has anyone else been having similar dreams? Eleanor kept her tone carefully neutral, the way she did when discussing symptoms patients were ashamed to admit. Sarah's expression shuddered. Best not ask such questions, miss. Some stones are better left unturned. But your grandmother knew when to look away. The older woman's voice dropped even lower. She knew which paths to walk and which to avoid, which doors to knock on and which to pass by in silence. Maybe you should follow her example. She clutched Alice tighter. Maybe we all should. Before Eleanor could respond, Sarah hurried away, half carrying her daughter toward the safety of familiar walls and bolted doors. The square stood empty in their wake. Too empty. Eleanor turned slowly, counting the houses with shuttered windows, the shops that should be open but weren't, the absence of the normal sounds that filled a village at mid-morning. No children playing, no merchants hawking wares, no one, just Eleanor, standing in the center of a place that suddenly felt less like home and more like a stage set, waiting for its tragedy to begin. You're still here. She spun toward the voice, pulse jumping. He stood in the shadow of the old fountain crumbling stone angels, weeping into moss-choked basins exactly where shadow fell deepest despite the morning sun. Dressed in the same black, face partially obscured by the brim of a wide hat that cast his features into relief. But she would have known him anyway, by the unnatural stillness of his form, the way space seemed to bend around him like light around a lodestone. It's daylight, Eleanor said, because apparently her mind had decided to cling to details while the impossible stood 15 feet away. You shouldn't be here. Daylight burns. His lips curved, not quite a smile. I did not say it kills. He gestured at the shadows pooling around him. There are ways to move through the world, even for creatures such as I. Though I admit, I had hoped you would demonstrate more self-preservation than your grandmother. You knew her? I know all who dwell at the boundary. He took a step forward, and Eleanor noticed the way the sunlight seemed to recoil from him, shadow clinging to his form like a second skin. She was wise enough to accept the forest's terms. You, I think, are too curious for wisdom. You carved that symbol in my door. Did you remove it? No. Then you are learning. He moved closer, still keeping to the shadows, but near enough now that she could see his face clearly for the first time in daylight or what passed for daylight around him. Young, she thought, though young was the wrong word for something that held centuries in its eyes. Beautiful in a way that hurt to look at, all sharp angles and pale skin, and that terrible, ageless stillness. The symbol will keep you safe from most things that hunt at night. Most. Not all. What's happening to this village? Eleanor demanded. Alice Miller spoke of boundaries weakening, of choosing sides. What does that mean? His expression hardened. It means that wars fought in shadow eventually spill into light. It means old treaties are crumbling, and the protection your people have enjoyed for 300 years is coming to an end. He reached out as though to touch her face, then stopped, hand hovering in the air between them. It means you should have run when I gave you the chance. I don't run. Pride. The word sounded almost sad. Your grandmother's greatest flaw, inherited by her heir. Very well, Miss Ashford. If you insist on remaining, then you must understand the nature of the cage you've chosen. He drew back his sleeve, exposing forearm marked with scars, silver lines crisscrossing pale skin, in intricate patterns that might have been writing, or might have been wounds that never fully healed. 3 centuries ago, my kind and yours made a covenant, he said quietly. We would protect Thornhaven from the truly monstrous things that dwell in darkness. In exchange, you would honor the old ways, the offerings, the respect, the acknowledgement that humanity does not own every shadow. His fingers traced the scars. I bound myself to that oath with blood and iron and words that cannot be unspoken. But the other houses grow restless. They see humanity spread, your cities consuming wilderness, your technology driving out mystery. They want to break the covenant. "You're talking about vampires," Eleanor said, and was surprised at how steady her voice remained. "You're telling me vampires are real and they've been protecting this village?" Protecting is perhaps too kind a word. His smile held no warmth. But yes. Thunder rolled overhead, though the sky remained cloudless. Eleanor looked up, saw nothing but blue emptiness, and understood that some storms brewed in places beyond weather. "Why tell me this?" she asked. "Why? Not simply let the covenant break and I gave my word." His hand fell back to his side, and I do not know how to be forsworn. He turned away, shadow already beginning to claim him. "Go home, Miss Ashford. Bar your doors. When darkness falls, stay inside, no matter what you hear. I will do what I can to maintain the boundary, but my power alone may not be enough." "Wait." Eleanor stepped forward without thinking. I don't even know your name." He paused at the edge of shadow, profile sharp as broken glass against the darkness. For a long moment she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "Lucian." The name fell like a stone into still water. Lucian Blackthorn, Lord of the Winter Court, and the last fool stupid enough to believe in honor. Then he was gone, and Eleanor stood alone in the empty square with her heart hammering and the taste of autumn ash on her tongue, wondering what covenant she had just stumbled into and what price its breaking would demand. The church bells tolled. 11. Their sound flat, and somehow wrong, as though even blessed bronze knew that holiness held no power here. Eleanor looked down and discovered her hands were shaking. Not with fear, she realized, with anticipation. The screaming started at dusk. Eleanor had spent the afternoon tending to patients with hands that wouldn't stop trembling, offering remedies for ailments that suddenly seemed absurdly mundane compared to the knowledge burning behind her ribs. Old Thomas's lungs would fail within the month. Widow Blackwood's rheumatism would worsen with winter's approach. All of them would die, eventually, in the normal ways that humans died. But normal had become a word stripped of meaning. Now she stood at her kitchen window, watching darkness devour the forest as a woman's shriek tore through the twilight raw and primal and cut short with terrible abruptness. The roses on her table had begun to wilt, their black petals curling inward like hands closing around secrets. The symbol on her door pulsed with heat she could feel from across the room. "Bar your doors. Stay inside no matter what you hear." Lucian's warning echoed in her mind, but Eleanor's grandmother had taught her that healers didn't hide when people suffered. She grabbed her medical bag, threw a cloak over her shoulders, and was halfway to the door when it exploded inward. Not broken, the hinges remained intact, the wood undamaged. But the door swung open with such force that wind howled through her cottage like the breath of something massive and hungry, extinguishing every candle in a single gust. A figure stumbled across the threshold. Female, young, bleeding from a wound that painted her throat crimson in the moonlight now streaming through the open door. She collapsed at Eleanor's feet, gasping words that might have been prayers or pleas or simply the last sounds a dying animal makes. Eleanor dropped to her knees, hands already moving to assess the damage. "What happened? Who?" "Sanctuary." The girl's voice bubbled with blood. "The symbol. Protection." Her eyes wide and dark with terror, fixed on Eleanor's face. "Please, don't let it take me back." "Back where?" Eleanor pressed cloth against the wound, trying to staunch the bleeding. Too deep. The cut had severed something vital. "Who did this to you?" "The court." Blood spilled over the girl's lips. "The beautiful ones who drink and never stop drinking. I thought if I served them faithfully." She coughed, body convulsing. "But there's no faithfulness in hell." Her hand shot out, gripping Eleanor's wrist with surprising strength. Her palm was ice cold, as though whatever warmth she'd possessed had already begun to flee. "Tell him," she whispered. "Tell Blackthorn that House Crimson has claimed the eastern boundary. Tell him the hunt rides at midnight, and this time they won't stop at the treaty line. Tell him." Her words dissolved into a wet rattle. The hand on Eleanor's wrist went limp. Eleanor sat back on her heels, staring at the body sprawled across her grandmother's threshold. Blood pooled on ancient floorboards, seeping into cracks and crevices where 100 years of life had left its marks. The girl, she couldn't have been more than 18, wore the remains of a fine dress, silk now torn and stained, and a collar of bruises circled her throat like jewelry, like someone had been feeding from her for a very long time. The sound that emerged from Eleanor's throat was somewhere between a sob and a snarl. She had witnessed death before too many times, in too many forms, but always as something natural, inevitable. This was murder. This was waste. This was a warning. "God damn you," she whispered to the darkness beyond her door. "God damn all of you." The darkness, it seemed, had been waiting for permission. They materialized from shadow like smoke-given form 3 figures, tall and unnaturally graceful, moving with the predatory fluidity of hunting cats. 2 male, 1 female, all dressed in silk and velvet that belonged to a previous century, their faces beautiful and terrible and utterly empty of anything resembling human compassion. The female stepped forward, lips curved in something that might have been a smile if smiles could cut. "Careless of you, little mortal, to extend sanctuary to our property." Her voice carried the music of cut glass and church bells and screams. "We've come to reclaim what belongs to House Crimson." Eleanor stood slowly, positioning herself between the vampires and the dead girl. "She's beyond your reach now." "Is she?" The female vampire tilted her head, an oddly bird-like gesture. "The blood still steams. The heart only stopped beating moments ago. We could revive her, you know. Make her walk and talk and serve us for eternity." She took a step closer, and Eleanor caught her scent roses and rot and something sweet-sick underneath. "Or we could take you instead. Fresh blood, untainted by years of feeding. You'd last so much longer than this broken thing. You're on protected ground." Eleanor forced the words out steady, remembering everything Lucian had told her. "The Covenant is dead." One of the male vampires laughed, the sound like bones breaking. "Lord Blackthorn clings to his honor like a drowning man clings to driftwood, but the other courts have voted. The boundary falls at midnight. These sheep are ours to slaughter as we please. She bears his mark." The second male vampire pointed at Eleanor's door, at the symbol still glowing with faint heat. "Blackthorn's protection. If we touch her, then let him come and stop us." The female vampire's eyes flashed red, not metaphorically, but literally, pupils igniting with inner fire. "I'm curious to see if the Winter Lord still has teeth, or if centuries of playing guardian have finally neutered him." She reached for Eleanor. The world exploded into ice and shadow. Lucian appeared between them, manifesting from nothing with such suddenness that the attacking vampire stumbled backward. He wore no hat now, no concealing shadows, just stark black against the moonlight, eyes blazing silver, and an expression that made Eleanor's blood run cold despite the fact that he stood in her defense. "Seraphine." The name emerged as a caress wrapped around a threat. "I see House Crimson continues to demonstrate its characteristic restraint." The female vampire Seraphine bared fangs that gleamed like pearl knives. "The vote was unanimous, Blackthorn. Even you cannot hold the boundary alone." "Can I not?" Lucian's hand moved almost too fast to follow, and suddenly he held Seraphine by the throat, lifting her off the ground as though she weighed nothing at all. Frost spread from his fingers, creeping across her skin in delicate patterns that looked almost beautiful until Seraphine began to scream. "I am older than your house, child. I drank from the veins of conquerors while your maker still drew mortal breath. Do not presume to know my limits." He released her, and she collapsed to the ground, clawing at the ice now coating her throat. The 2 male vampires rushed forward, but Lucian gestured almost negligently, and they froze mid-step, held by invisible force. "Return to your mistress," he said quietly, but his voice carried the weight of mountains and winter storms and things too old to have names. "Tell her that the eastern boundary remains under my protection. Tell her that any who cross it without invitation will learn why they once called me the Winter Death." His eyes found Seraphine's, still struggling to breathe through the ice. "And tell her that if she sends you after Eleanor Ashford again, I will demonstrate exactly how creatively immortality can suffer." The ice shattered. Seraphine gasped, drawing breath she no longer needed out of habit or fear. She and her companions backed toward the door, movements jerky with terror poorly concealed. "This isn't over," Seraphine spat. "The hunt will find me waiting." Lucian's smile was winter itself. "I suggest you run now. Dawn comes early this time of year." They fled, dissolving into shadow and mist, leaving only the lingering scent of roses and rot and fear. Silence crashed down like a physical weight. Eleanor stood frozen, mind struggling to process what she'd witnessed. Lucian turned to face her, and she saw the cost of his display written in the tension of his jaw, the way his hands clenched and unclenched at his sides as though fighting some internal war. "You shouldn't have let her in," he said, voice rough. The moment you granted sanctuary, you marked yourself as enemy to House Crimson. She was dying. Eleanor found her voice, though it emerged shakier than she'd like. Was I supposed to let her bleed out on my doorstep? Yes. His expression softened slightly. That would have been the wise choice. But you are your grandmother's heir in more than blood, I see. Cursed with compassion. He moved past her to kneel beside the dead girl, his touch surprisingly gentle as he closed her staring eyes. Isabella. She was one of their blood servants, humans who served the courts in exchange for the promise of immortality. His fingers traced the collar of bruises at her throat. They fed her just enough of their blood to bind her, to make her crave their bite like an addict craves poison, when she tried to escape. He gestured at the wound. They made an example. How long? Eleanor's voice emerged as barely more than a whisper. How long had she been serving them? 5 years, since she was 13. Lucian stood, and for the first time Eleanor saw something like genuine anger cross his features. House Crimson specializes in broken things. They find the desperate, the lost, the ones with nowhere else to turn, and they offer salvation. By the time their victims understand the price, it's far too late to flee. Eleanor looked down at Isabella's body, at a girl who should have been planning her wedding or learning a trade, or doing any of the 1,000 ordinary things that filled a young woman's life. Instead, she died bleeding and terrified, trying to escape monsters who wore beauty like a mask. The hunt, Eleanor said. Seraphine mentioned a hunt. What is that? Lucian's jaw tightened. An old tradition. When the courts want to break a boundary or claim new territory, they ride out under the full moon and slaughter everything in their path, beast and human alike. It makes no difference. They call it sport. He met her eyes, and she saw something that might have been regret in their silver depths. I've held them back for 3 centuries, but tonight, they'll have the numbers and the will to push through. And I. He looked away. I cannot be everywhere at once. Then what do we do? We. He laughed, the sound bitter. There is no we, Miss Ashford. You are a mortal healer with a gift for stubborn foolishness. I am a monster playing at honor. When the hunt comes, you will bar your doors and pray. I will do what I've always done, stand in the gap and try not to drown in the blood. That's not a plan. It's the only plan that's ever worked. He turned toward the door, and shadow already beginning to claim him. I must prepare. Stay inside. Do not, under any circumstances, attempt to help. Your grandmother's symbol will keep you safe through the night, but only if you remain behind it. Lucian. Eleanor caught his arm without thinking, and the moment her fingers touched his skin, she gasped. Cold. Not the chill of winter, but the absolute absence of heat, as though she'd gripped a stone that had never known the sun. Yet underneath that impossible cold, she felt something else, a pulse, faint but steady, like a heart beating at a frequency almost too slow to register. He stared down at her hand on his arm, expression unreadable. When he spoke, his voice was soft as falling snow. Do you know what it costs me to stand here and not tear out your throat? Your blood sings, Eleanor Ashford. It calls to every predatory instinct I've spent centuries learning to control. If I were anyone else, anything else, you would already be dead. Eleanor didn't let go. But you're not anyone else. You're Lucian Blackthorn, Lord of the Winter Court, and you gave your word to protect the boundary. She met his silver eyes without flinching. Tell me how to help you keep it. For a long moment, he simply stared at her. Then, slowly, something shifted in his expression, a crack in the icy perfection, revealing something raw and almost human underneath. You truly are a fool, he murmured, but perhaps. He reached up, covering her hand with his own, and the contrast between their skin, hers warm and living, his cold as death, should have been terrifying. Instead, Eleanor felt an unexpected rightness, as though 2 halves of something long broken had suddenly aligned. Perhaps fools and monsters together might accomplish what neither could alone. Thunder cracked overhead, though the sky remained clear. Somewhere in the distance, a horn sounded low and mournful and full of terrible promise. The hunt was beginning. Lucian's fingers tightened on hers. Can you ride? Yes. Can you face death without flinching? Eleanor looked down at Isabella's body, at the waste and cruelty and senseless violence. I've been facing death my whole life. Tonight, I'd like to try fighting it instead. His smile, when it came, was sharp as broken glass and twice as beautiful. Then come, little healer. Let me show you how immortals make war." He pulled her toward the door, toward the darkness, toward the sound of approaching hoofbeats that shook the earth like the drums of an invading army. Eleanor went willingly, her grandmother's voice echoing in her memory. "Every tale has roots, child. Every superstition grew from seed of truth." Tonight, she would learn exactly how deep those roots grew and what flowers bloomed in soil watered with blood. Lucien's horse was not a horse. Eleanor understood this the moment she saw it. A massive creature that emerged from shadow, with eyes like burning coals and breath that misted the air despite autumn's lingering warmth. Its coat absorbed moonlight, black as the spaces between stars, and when it moved, darkness rippled around it like water. "She won't harm you," Lucien said, already mounted, extending his hand down to Eleanor. "Nightshade has carried mortals before, though I admit none quite so determined to throw themselves into danger." Eleanor grasped his hand, still shocking in its coldness, and let him pull her up behind him. The creature beneath them shifted, muscle and sinew moving with predatory grace, and she wrapped her arms around Lucien's waist out of pure survival instinct. His body felt like carved stone wrapped in silk. No warmth, no rise and fall of breathing, just absolute stillness and the faint, impossible pulse she'd felt before, beating slow as seasons changing. "Hold tight," he murmured. "Nightshade runs faster than mortal horses should, and the path we take exists only at the boundary between your world and mine." Before Eleanor could ask what that meant, the horse the creature lunged forward. The world dissolved. They rode through a landscape that flickered between reality and something else, something that wore the forest's face but twisted it into shapes. Eleanor's mind struggled to comprehend. Trees stretched impossibly tall, their branches weaving patterns that hurt to look at directly. The moon hung swollen and red, casting light that painted everything in shades of blood and shadow. And everywhere she felt the presence of watching things, intelligence without form, hunger without shape. The veil, Lucien called over the wind that howled around them. The space between the mortal realm and the courts of night. We can travel faster here, but do not look too closely at what you see. Some truths are not meant for human eyes. Eleanor pressed her face against his back and held on. The horn sounded again, closer now, and was answered by others, a dozen voices raised in terrible harmony. Through the gaps between her eyelids, Eleanor glimpsed them. Riders on creatures like Nightshade, pale figures in hunting leathers and silk, all converging on a single point ahead. The boundary. She felt it before she saw it, a thrumming in the air like the moment before lightning strikes. A sense of vast power held barely in check. Then Nightshade burst through the veil and reality snapped back into focus. They stood on a hilltop overlooking Thornhaven. The village sprawled below like a child's toy town. Between the forest and civilization, Eleanor could now see what had been invisible before. A line of light, faint as spider's silk, stretching in a great circle around the settlement. Ancient stones marked its path, weathered and moss-covered, easy to dismiss as natural. Formations. Except they weren't natural at all. "The original boundary," Lucien said, dismounting and helping Eleanor down. His hands lingered on her waist a moment longer than necessary. "Laid down 3 centuries ago with blood oaths and binding rituals that cost both our kinds dearly. As long as it holds, the village remains protected. Once it breaks, he didn't need to finish." Eleanor could see the hunt massing at the tree line, dozens of riders, their creatures pawing the earth, teeth bared and eyes gleaming with anticipation. More vampires on foot, moving through the shadows with liquid grace. And at their center, mounted on a beast that dwarfed the others, a figure in crimson armor that seemed to drink the moonlight. "Lord Crimson himself," Lucien murmured. "They want this badly if he's riding out personally. How do we stop them?" "We don't." He moved to one of the ancient stones, placing his palm against its surface. The stone began to glow with pale blue light, cold fire, spreading along the boundary line. "I can reinforce the barrier, pour my own power into the old wards, but it will only delay them. When the full moon reaches its zenith," he glanced up at the sky, where the bloated red moon climbed steadily higher, "the boundary will weaken enough for them to force their way through. Unless what?" He turned to face her, and in his eyes Eleanor saw something she hadn't seen before. Uncertainty. Fear. Not for himself, she realized, but for what he was about to ask. "The boundary was established with consent," he said carefully. "Mortal and immortal, freely given, sealed in blood. It draws power from both sides of the veil, from your world and from mine. But over the centuries, as humans forgot the old ways. Their side of the pact has weakened. The wards remember my blood. They no longer remember yours. Understanding crashed down like cold water. You need me to renew the covenant. I need you to bleed for them. He gestured at the stones, now blazing with cold light along the entire boundary. To give freely what was given 3 centuries ago: consent, blood, and the acknowledgement that we are bound together, mortal and monster, in mutual protection. His voice dropped. It will hurt, Eleanor. The ritual requires more than a drop or two, and once you give your blood to the boundary, you'll be tied to it. To this place. He hesitated. To me. Tied how? I don't know. The admission seemed to cost him. The original pact was written in languages that predate kingdoms, sealed with magics we've half forgotten. But my predecessor and his mortal counterpart were bound until death, their fates intertwined. Where one suffered, the other felt it. What one desired, the other could sense. He reached out as though to touch her face, then stopped. I will not lie to you and pretend there is no danger in this. You may lose yourself, or worse, you may bind your mortality to my eternity in ways neither of us can predict. The hunt's horn sounded again, and this time the creatures at the boundary surged forward. They hit the barrier of light and recoiled, screaming a sound that set Eleanor's teeth on edge and sent every animal instinct she possessed howling for her to run. But healers didn't run. Tell me what to do, she said. Lucian's expression flickered surprise, relief, something that might have been admiration or might have been grief. You're certain? Once begun, the ritual cannot be stopped halfway. Either it succeeds and the boundary holds, or it fails and the hunt slaughters everyone in that village. Eleanor looked down at Thornhaven, at the scattered lights of homes where people slept unaware of the monsters massing at their borders. She thought of Alice Miller and her fever dreams, of old Thomas and widow Blackwood, and all the others who trusted her grandmother's heir to protect them. Tell me what to do. He studied her face for a long moment, silver eyes reflecting, moonlight, and something deeper. Then he nodded, once, sharp and decisive. Come. He led her to the largest of the boundary stones, a monolith twice her height, covered in carvings that seemed to shift and writhe in the cold light. Lucian drew a knife from his belt, the blade black as obsidian and carved with symbols that matched the ones on his scarred forearms. Give me your hand. Eleanor extended her right hand, palm up. Her fingers trembled slightly, but she forced them steady. Lucian cradled her hand in both of his touch still shocking in its coldness. The old words must be spoken. They'll come to you, the boundary will guide your tongue. Don't fight it, and when the pain comes. His thumb traced the lines of her palm, an oddly intimate gesture. Remember that I'm here. You're not alone in this. He pressed the blade against her palm. The cut was quick and precise, splitting her lifeline from wrist to fingertip. Blood welled immediately, hot against the night air. And Lucian guided her hand to the stone. The moment her blood touched ancient rock, the world caught fire. Not literal flames, something worse. Power erupted through her veins like molten glass, and Eleanor screamed as the boundary reached into her, pulling at something fundamental, something deeper than blood or bone. Her vision fractured, showing her Thornhaven across centuries. The original settlement, wooden buildings and dirt roads. The first winter, when half the population died. The moment a young woman stood exactly where Eleanor stood now, bleeding onto stone while a vampire lord she loved and feared in equal measure held her steady. The covenant bound them. In blood, in breath, in the space between heartbeat and stillness, words poured from Eleanor's mouth in a language she didn't know but understood in her bones. I offer my blood to the boundary, my life to the protection, my consent freely given, witnessed by moon and shadow in the ancient compact. Lucian spoke in response. His voice layered with harmonics that suggested multiple speakers himself and all the lords who'd come before. I accept the offering. I bind my power to mortal will. I swear by winter's long night and summer's brief day that no harm shall pass while I endure. Eleanor felt Lucian's hand cover hers, felt the prick of the blade opening his own palm, felt their blood mingle on the stone. And then the boundary exploded outward. Light blazed along the circle, no longer cold blue but white gold, brilliant as lightning, strong as sunrise. It hit the massed hunt like a physical blow, and vampires screamed as the renewed wards burned them back, their creatures fleeing in panic. The line of ancient stones thrummed with power, each one blazing like a star, and Eleanor understood with sudden clarity that she could feel them now every point of the boundary, every inch of protected ground, as though they'd become part of her nervous system. And beyond the stones, pressed against this barrier like a wolf against glass, she felt Lord Crimson's fury. "This changes nothing, Blackthorn." A voice boomed across the hilltop, thunder and brass and breaking glass. "You've bought them one more night. Perhaps two, but the vote stands. The courts are united against you. Eventually, you will fall, and when you do, we will feast on their bones and hang your corpse from these very stones, as a warning to any other fool who thinks honor means anything in the dark." Lucian's hand tightened on Eleanor's. "Then I suggest you bring an army, Marcus, because I've held this boundary for 300 years, and I'll hold it 300 more if necessary. We'll see." The hunt withdrew, darkness peeling back like a receding tide. Within moments, the forest stood empty, or appeared to, though Eleanor suspected 100 eyes still watched from the shadows. Lucian released Eleanor's hand and stepped back, and she nearly collapsed without his support. The world tilted, her knees buckling, but he caught her before she fell. "Easy," he murmured, lowering her gently to the ground beside the boundary stone. "The ritual takes a toll. Your body needs time to adjust." "Adjust to what?" Eleanor's voice emerged hoarse. She looked down at her palm, where the cut should have been. The wound had closed, not healed cleanly, but sealed with silver scar tissue that glittered in the moonlight like embedded starlight. "What did we just do?" "Saved the village. Doomed ourselves." He sat beside her, close enough that she could feel the cold radiating from him. "I'm not certain which, if I'm being honest." Eleanor lifted her scarred palm, examining it in the light of the still glowing boundary. She could feel it now, a thread connecting her to the stones, to the power thrumming through them, and underneath it all, another thread stretching from her to the man beside her. Not intrusive, exactly, more like awareness. She could sense his presence the way she might sense the sun on her face, constant and undeniable. "I can feel you," she said quietly. "Not your thoughts, but your existence. Like there's a part of you inside my head now. And you." His hand found hers again, turning it so the scarred palm faced upward. His own hand bore a matching scar, silver against pale skin. "The pact bound us, Eleanor. Not master to servant, not maker to maid, but something older. Something that predates my kind and yours." He traced the silver scar with one finger. "I am sorry. I gave you no time to consider the cost. Would you have let the village fall if I'd refused?" He was silent for a long moment. "No. I would have tried to hold the boundary alone, poured every drop of power I possess into the wards, and likely failed. Then I would have stood at the village edge and killed as many as I could before they tore me apart." A bitter smile touched his lips. "Not much of a plan, I admit. Then I'm glad I saved you the trouble of dying uselessly." Eleanor leaned against his shoulder without thinking, exhaustion making her reckless. He stiffened, but didn't pull away. "How long do we have before they try again?" "Days. Perhaps a week, if we're fortunate." His arm came around her shoulders, hesitant at first, then firmer. "They'll regroup, plan, find a way to overwhelm the boundary despite the renewed strength. And when they come again, We'll need to be ready," Eleanor corrected. "The boundary is mine now too. My blood, my consent, my responsibility." "Eleanor, don't." She lifted her head to meet his silver eyes. "Don't try to protect me from what I've freely chosen. I knew the cost. I paid it willingly. And if we're bound together now, then I'm part of this war whether you like it or not." He stared at her, expression cycling through several emotions too quickly for her to name. Then, slowly, he smiled, not the bitter expression she'd seen before, but something genuine, warm despite the coldness of his skin. "You are extraordinary," he said softly, "and terrifying, and I suspect I've just allied myself with someone far more dangerous than House Crimson could ever be. You have no idea." Eleanor grinned despite her exhaustion. "My grandmother used to say I was stubborn as stone and twice as heavy." She was correct. Lucian stood, pulling her up with him. Nightshade materialized from shadow, patient as a waiting servant. "Come, dawn approaches, and you need rest. Tomorrow we plan, we prepare, and we find a way to win a war that everyone assumes we've already lost." He helped her mount, then swung up behind her this time, his arms bracketing her against the saddle. As Nightshade began to pick her way down the hillside, Eleanor looked back at the boundary stones, still glowing with soft light. Lucian? Yes? Isabella, the girl who died in my cottage. What happens to her now? His arms tightened slightly around her. I'll see that she's buried properly, with the rites her faith demands. And when this is over, when the boundary holds and House Crimson has been driven back. His voice dropped. I'll make them pay for what they did to her. I promise you that. Eleanor reached up and covered his hand with her scarred palm. Through their new connection, she felt his grief deep and old, and buried under centuries of necessary coldness. He'd seen too many Isabellas, she realized. Too many broken things sacrificed to vampire politics and ancient cruelty. We'll make them pay, she said. Together. His lips brushed her hair, not quite a kiss, more like a benediction. Together, he agreed. They rode through the pre-dawn darkness, bound by blood and covenant, and the beginning of something neither of them could name. Behind them, the boundary blazed like a chain of fallen stars, holding back the dark, for now. But Eleanor could feel the pressure building beyond the wards, could sense the malevolence of the hunt waiting for their next opportunity. War was coming, painted in blood and moonlight and roses black as sin, and she would be ready. The first rays of dawn touched the horizon as they reached her cottage. Lucian dismounted quickly, helping her down with gentle hands before shadow began to creep up his exposed skin. Go inside, he urged. Sleep. Recover your strength. What about you? I have preparations to make, defenses to shore up, and I must speak with what few allies I have left in the courts. He was already backing toward deeper shadow, morning light clearly paining him. Lock your door. Don't remove the ward. And Eleanor? He paused at the edge of darkness. Thank you, for your courage, your trust. 4, he trailed off, then finished simply, everything. Before she could respond, he dissolved into shadow and was gone. Eleanor stood alone in her dooryard, watching dawn paint the sky in shades of rose and gold. Her palm throbbed with phantom pain, the silver scar gleaming like captured moonlight. Through the invisible thread, connecting them, she could feel Lucian retreating to whatever dark place he called home, could sense his weariness and determination and something else, something warm and unexpected and dangerous in its tenderness. She touched her fingers to her lips, remembering the ghost pressure of his kiss against her hair. What have I done? She whispered to the morning. The boundary hummed in response, power singing through her veins, and Eleanor understood that she'd bound herself to more than just a place or a treaty. She'd bound herself to him, to Lucian Blackthorn, Lord of Winter, last guardian of a covenant the world had forgotten. And despite the danger, despite the fear, despite everything, her rational mind screamed. Eleanor realized she didn't regret it, not even a little. She turned and went inside, closing the door on daylight, and dreamed of silver eyes and cold hands and a voice asking, "What are you willing to sacrifice for truth?" The answer, it seemed, kept changing, but one thing remained constant. She would not run. She would not hide. She would stand with her monster against the coming storm, and whatever happened next, they would face it together. Eleanor woke to whispers. Not words, precisely more like the memory of conversation. Voices bleeding through the thread that connected her to Lucian. She could feel him somewhere distant, speaking with others, his emotions a complex weave of frustration and wariness, and something sharp as broken glass. He was negotiating, with predators. She sat up, disoriented, and realized the sun hung low in the western sky. She'd slept through the entire day. Her palm ached where the silver scar gleamed, and when she flexed her fingers, she felt the boundary respond a distant thrumming, like touching a harp string and feeling all the others vibrate in sympathy. The cottage felt emptier than before. Wrong, somehow. As though in binding herself to the boundary, she'd also bound herself away from simple domesticity. The herbs hanging from the rafters, her grandmother's worn recipe books, the plain furniture that had witnessed 100 years of ordinary life, all of it seemed to belong to someone else now. Someone who hadn't bled onto ancient stones and felt the weight of immortal wars settle across her shoulders. The roses on her kitchen table had turned to ash. Eleanor stared at them, at the perfect black shapes that crumbled into dust at her breath. Even the glass vases showed hairline cracks, as though the flowers had been drawing life from more than just water. A knock at the door made her jump. She approached cautiously, acutely aware that daylight no longer meant safety. "Who is it?" "Alice Miller, miss. Please, I need to speak with you. It's urgent." Eleanor opened the door to find the girl standing alone, no mother hovering protectively nearby. Alice wore a dress too thin for the cooling weather and no shoes, her feet caked with forest mud. Her eyes were bright with fever, or something that looked like fever but burned with a different kind of heat. Alice, what? They came to me in dreams again. The girl pushed past Eleanor into the cottage, movements jerky with barely contained panic. But this time they left something behind. She held out her hand. In her palm lay a coin, ancient, tarnished silver, stamped with symbols that made Eleanor's eyes water when she tried to focus on them. Don't touch it. Alice yanked her hand back. It burns when I hold it too long, but I can't seem to let it go, they said. Her voice dropped to a whisper. They said it's an invitation. To the Court of Crimson. They want to make me an offer. Eleanor's blood ran cold. What kind of offer? Power. Protection. A chance to never be weak again. Alice's expression twisted between longing and terror. They showed me things, miss. Beautiful things. A palace made of crystal and darkness. Music that makes you want to dance until your feet bleed. And blood. So much blood, but they promised it wouldn't hurt. They said drinking from the chosen ones is like dreaming, like... Alice, stop. Eleanor gripped the girl's shoulders. They're lying. Everything they showed you, every promise they made, it's designed to lure you into their trap. You've seen what they do to their servants. Isabella died on my doorstep trying to escape them. I know. Tears streaked Alice's face. I know, but I can't stop thinking about it. The coin won't leave my hand. Even when I'm awake, I hear them calling. And Mama, she sobbed. Mama found the coin this morning and tried to throw it away, but it came back. It's always coming back. What if they're right? What if the only way to survive what's coming is to join them? Before Eleanor could answer, the temperature in the cottage plummeted. Lucian materialized from shadow, still wreathed in the darkness of day sleep, his eyes blazing with cold fury. Who gave you that coin? Alice shrieked and stumbled backward, but Eleanor caught her. It's all right. She hesitated. What was Lucian to her? Protector? Ally? Something more complicated than either? He's with me. Lucian barely glanced at Eleanor, his attention fixed on the coin in Alice's hand with an expression that suggested he was looking at poison. That's a blood marker. Ancient magic, older than most vampires remember. Once accepted, it creates a link between the bearer and the giver. It allows them to track you, to whisper in your thoughts, to pull at your will until you come to them willingly. He reached out slowly, as one might approach a frightened animal. May I? Alice extended her hand, trembling. Lucian didn't touch the coin. Instead, he drew a symbol in the air above it, complex, layered, written in frost that hung suspended for a moment before dissolving. The coin shuddered, then fell from Alice's palm as though released from invisible fingers. The girl gasped, clutching her hand to her chest. It's gone. The voices. Are they quieter now? I can still hear them, but they're distant, like shouting from far away instead of whispering right in my ear. The marker has been partially severed, but not destroyed. Lucian crushed the coin beneath his boot, grinding it into the floorboards until only silver dust remained. They've marked at least a dozen mortals in Thornhaven, I'd wager. Children and young adults, those with strong wills or unique gifts. House Crimson is building an army from within the boundary itself. Eleanor felt ice settle in her stomach. Can you sever all the markers? Not alone. It requires specific magic, precise timing, and most importantly, he turned to face her fully, and she saw exhaustion etched into his features despite his careful control. It requires the consent of those marked. They must want to be free more than they want what the court offers. And that, Eleanor, is often the hardest magic to overcome. Desire. But you can teach me. The words emerged before. She'd fully thought them through, but the moment they left her lips, Eleanor knew they were right. I'm bound to the boundary now. I can feel it power humming in my veins. Magic I don't understand but can sense. If you teach me to wield it, we can save them together. Lucian stared at her for a long moment. Through their connection, she felt his conflict, the urge to protect her warring with respect for her agency, desire to keep her safe clashing with the desperate need for an ally who could walk in daylight. It's dangerous, he said finally. Magic is not knowledge to be learned from books. He gestured at the scattered silver dust. It's will made manifest, power drawn from sacrifice. Every spell costs something, Eleanor. Blood, time, pieces of yourself you may not get back. Are you certain you want to walk that path? Are you certain you want to walk it alone? She countered. His lips quirked almost a smile. You are going to be the death of me, or my salvation. I'm not certain which. Can't it be both? This time he did smile, though it carried an edge of sadness. Yes, I suspect it can. He glanced at Alice, who stood watching them with wide eyes. Go home, child. Tell your mother what happened, but do not speak of the coin to anyone else. House Crimson will know I've interfered, and they'll be angry. Keep to populated areas. Travel only by daylight. And if you hear the voices again, he drew another symbol, this time on a piece of paper from his coat. Burn this. The smoke will summon me. Alice took the paper with shaking hands. Thank you. She looked at Eleanor. Both of you. I don't understand what's happening, but I'm glad you're fighting for us. After the girl left, silence settled heavy as stone. Eleanor became acutely aware that she and Lucian were alone for the first time since the ritual truly alone, without the urgency of battle or the presence of dying girls to distract from the strange intimacy of their connection. She could feel him in her mind, not thoughts but presence, the way one might feel another person standing close in a dark room. And underneath that awareness, something else stirred curiosity. Attraction, the pull of two opposite things, drawn together by forces neither fully understood. You should eat, Lucian said, breaking the tension. The ritual drained you more than you realize. You need to rebuild your strength. And you should hunt. Eleanor surprised herself with the boldness of the statement. I can feel your hunger through the bond. When did you last feed? His jaw tightened. That is not your concern. Everything about you is my concern now. You said it yourself, we're bound. She moved closer, studying his face in the fading light. He looked more human now than he had before, she realized. Or perhaps she was simply learning to see past the inhuman stillness to the person underneath. How does it work? The feeding? Why do you want to know? Because if we're going to fight this war together, I need to understand what you are. All of what you are. Not just the gentleman with silver eyes who saves villages, but the predator who needs blood to survive. She met his gaze steadily. Show me the monster, Lucian. Not to frighten me, but so I can see you clearly. He studied her for a long moment, something shifting in his expression. Then, with deliberate slowness, he reached up and pulled back his upper lip. His fangs descended not dramatically, not with theatrical flair, but with the simple mechanical precision of a blade sliding from its sheath. They were longer than she'd expected, sharp as surgical steel, and beautiful in their terrible efficiency. I am not human, he said, voice rough. I haven't been for 347 years. My heart beats 3 times an hour. I don't breathe unless I choose to. I don't age, don't sicken, don't die by any method your physicians would recognize. He touched one fang with his tongue. I sustain myself. On blood, human blood, animal blood. It makes little difference nutritionally, though the former is preferred, more potent, and yes, more pleasurable. Do you kill when you feed? Not anymore. His fangs retracted, returning to normal teeth. That was my maker's way, brutal, wasteful, treating humans as livestock. But I learned control. I take only what I need, and only from those who consent. Criminals awaiting execution. The dying who wish to trade their remaining blood for a peaceful end. Sometimes. He hesitated. Sometimes those who seek the pleasure of the bite itself, the euphoria that comes with vampire venom. There are those who consider it a drug worth the risk. Eleanor processed this, mind cataloging the information alongside everything else she'd learned about the impossible. Isabella. She was addicted to the bite, wasn't she? Yes. House Crimson deliberately doses their servants with enough venom to create dependence, then rations the bite to ensure loyalty. It's cruel and efficient and entirely legal by court law. Bitterness crept into his voice. I argued against the practice for decades. I lost that vote spectacularly. What about me? The question emerged quietly. Now that we're bound, do you? She gestured at her throat, at the pulse beating there. Do you want to feed from me? His expression went carefully blank. That is an exceedingly dangerous question, Eleanor. But you do. I can feel it through the bond. Not hunger, exactly, but awareness. Like you're constantly conscious of my blood moving through my veins. Hyper-awareness is more accurate, He turned away, moving to the window to stare out at the gathering dusk. Your blood calls to me in ways I don't fully understand. It's not simply the scent or the sound of your heartbeat, it's the life itself. The warmth, the mortality that I no longer possess. Being near you is, he trailed off. Is what? Intoxicating, maddening, like standing outside a feast I can see, but never taste. He glanced back at her, and his silver eyes held something raw and aching. But I would never take without permission. That is the one rule I have never broken, in 3.5 centuries. I will not start now. Eleanor crossed the room to stand beside him, her scarred palm tingling with proximity. What if I gave permission? He went absolutely still. You don't know what you're offering. Then explain it to me. She touched his arm, felt him shudder at the contact. Help me understand, Lucian. Not as a victim understanding her predator, but as an equal understanding her. She searched for the right word, her partner. For a long moment, he simply stared at her. Then, slowly, he raised his hand and brushed his knuckles against her cheek, a touch so gentle it barely registered, yet it sent electricity racing through her veins. When a vampire feeds from someone they're connected to, he said softly, it's not simply nourishment. It's intimacy beyond the physical. Blood carries memory, emotion, essence. To feed from you would be to taste your joys and sorrows, your hopes and fears. I would know you more deeply than any mortal lover could. His thumb traced the line of her jaw. And you would feel me in return, my hunger, yes, but also my gratitude, my desire, my... He stopped himself. Your what? My absolute inability to look away from you. The admission seemed torn from somewhere deep. Even now, even knowing the danger, I find myself pulled toward you like metal to lodestone. It terrifies me, Eleanor, because I am a creature of control, and around you, that control frays. Eleanor's breath caught. Through the bond, she felt the truth of his words, felt his desire and his fear tangled together, felt the war being waged between what he wanted and what he thought was right. I'm not afraid of you, she whispered. Perhaps you should be. But even as he said it, he leaned closer, and Eleanor found herself tilting her head, exposing her throat in a gesture that was pure instinct. Lucian made a sound somewhere between a groan and a growl. Eleanor, show me, she breathed. Not feeding, just let me feel what you feel. Let me see the monster and the man and everything in between. He hesitated for one more heartbeat. Then he lowered his head, pressing his lips to her throat, not biting, just touching, his mouth cool against her overheated skin. And through the bond, he opened himself to her. Eleanor gasped as sensation flooded through her, his hunger. Yes, sharp and constant and never fully satisfied, but underneath it, something else. Loneliness that spanned centuries. The weight of watching generations pass while he remained unchanged. And threaded through it all, a terrible, beautiful longing for connection that his immortality made almost impossible. I am so tired, his thoughts whispered to hers. Tired of watching everything I protect crumble. Tired of being alone. Tired of wanting things I cannot have. Like what? She thought back. His arms came around her, pulling her against him with sudden fierceness. Like you, like warmth and life and the way you look at me as though I'm still capable of being more than a weapon. Like the possibility that after 3 centuries of winter, I might remember what spring feels like. Eleanor wrapped her arms around him, holding him as tightly as he held her. She could feel tears on her face, hers or his. She couldn't tell through the bond. Everything blurred together, mortal and immortal, warm and cold, living and undead. You're not alone anymore, she whispered against his shoulder. And neither am I. He shuddered, and for just a moment, he allowed himself to be vulnerable, to be neither lord nor monster nor guardian, but simply a man who had been carrying too much for too long. They stood that way as darkness claimed the cottage, holding each other while the boundary hummed around them, and somewhere in the distance, the hunt prepared for another assault. But for this stolen moment, there was no war, no danger, no impossible odds, just 2 souls, mortal and immortal, finding unexpected refuge in each other's arms. And when Lucian finally pulled back, his expression held something Eleanor had never seen before. Hope. Tomorrow, he said quietly, I'll begin teaching you. Magic, combat, everything you'll need to survive what's coming. His hand found hers, their scarred palms pressing together. But tonight, will you simply allow me to be grateful? For what? that I am no longer the only fool fighting for a cause everyone else has abandoned. His smile was soft, genuine, devastating in its beauty. Thank you, Eleanor Ashford, for being exactly stubborn enough to save me from myself. She smiled back. Thank you, Lucian Blackthorn, for being exactly monster enough to show me that courage sometimes looks like darkness. He laughed then, a sound of genuine joy that transformed his face completely. Eleanor realized with sudden, terrifying clarity that she was in far more danger than any vampire could pose. Because somewhere between blood-stained roses and ancient covenants and battles fought in shadow, she had begun to fall in love with the impossible. And judging by the way Lucian looked at her silver eyes soft with wonder, a slight smile playing at his lips, he was falling too. The boundary thrummed in acknowledgement, ancient magic recognizing a truth as old as any covenant. Sometimes the most powerful protection came not from wards or weapons, but from two hearts learning to beat however impossibly as one. Training began at moonrise. Eleanor stood in the clearing behind her cottage, scarred palm raised, trying to ignore the way Lucian circled her like a predator assessing prey. 3 nights had passed since their embrace, and in that time, he'd become her teacher, patient, demanding, and utterly merciless when it came to her education in magic. Again, he said, voice, carrying that particular tone that suggested he could do this all night. Which, Eleanor reflected irritably, he literally could. Feel the boundary, not with your mind, with your blood. I am feeling it. Sweat dampened her brow despite the October chill. It's right there, humming like 1,000 bees just beneath my skin. Then why can't you shape it? He moved closer, close enough that she could feel the cold emanating from him. Magic is will made manifest, Eleanor. You have the power. You lack the focus. Perhaps I'd have more focus if you stopped circling me like a shark. When House Crimson attacks, they won't give you space to concentrate. His hand touched her shoulder, and even through fabric she felt the temperature drop. They'll come at you from all sides, fast and vicious, and you'll need to draw on the boundary's power while bleeding and terrified and watching people die. So forgive me if I don't coddle you. Eleanor spun to face him, frustration boiling over. I'm trying. The boundary exploded. Light erupted from her palm, not the controlled stream Lucian had been teaching her to manifest, but a wild surge of power that crackled through the air like lightning. It hit the nearest tree with enough force to char the bark black, leaving smoking ruin where living wood had been moments before. Silence crashed down. Eleanor stared at her hand, at the silver scar now glowing like captured starlight, at the evidence of what she'd just done. I didn't mean to. You're angry. Lucian's voice held something that might have been approval. Good. Anger is honest. It bypasses the conscious mind and reaches directly into the place where magic lives. He gestured at the destroyed tree. But anger without control is a weapon that harms friend and foe alike. Again. Lucian, again. Not a request. Eleanor raised her hand, this time consciously reaching for that hot coal of anger in her chest. The boundary responded immediately, power flooding through her veins like molten gold. But instead of letting it explode outward, she pictured it flowing like water, finding shape, taking form, becoming what she needed it to be. A sphere of light coalesced in her palm, smaller than before, controlled, better. Lucian moved behind her, not touching but close enough that she felt his presence like a physical weight. Now throw it, not at a target, at me. Eleanor's concentration shattered. What? No. Eleanor. His hand settled on her shoulders, grip firm. You need to understand that magic intended to harm will feel different than magic intended to shield. The boundary's power can be both sword and shield, but you must learn the distinction in your bones, not your head. His breath ghosted against her ear. I can take whatever you throw at me. I've survived far worse. Now throw it. She hesitated, every instinct screaming against deliberately attacking him, but through their bond, she felt his certainty, his absolute confidence, that she couldn't truly hurt him. Trust me, his thoughts whispered to hers. Eleanor pivoted and hurled the sphere of light. Lucian caught it. Not physically, he simply raised his hand and the light stopped, suspended in the air between them, then slowly dissolved into mist. His smile was sharp as broken glass. Good, but you pulled back at the last moment. I felt your hesitation through the bond. Again, and this time, mean it. Eleanor created another sphere, larger this time, crackling with barely contained power. I understand. Do you? He moved with inhuman speed, suddenly behind her, arms wrapping around her waist to cage her against him. His voice dropped to a purr. Because House Crimson won't give you time to think. They'll be on you before you can blink, teeth at your throat, claws in your belly. You'll have seconds to react. Will you hesitate then? Will you hold back? The sphere in her hand blazed brighter. Let me go. Make me. His grip tightened, fractionally. Use the magic, Eleanor. Push me back. Burn me if you must. Show me you can protect yourself when mercy is a luxury you cannot afford. Something snapped inside her. Eleanor didn't think. She simply wanted space, wanted air, wanted him away from her so she could breathe, and the boundary responded with devastating efficiency. Power exploded outward in all directions, a shockwave of pure force that sent Lucian flying backward. He hit a tree hard enough to crack the trunk, sliding down to land in a crouch, and for one terrible moment Eleanor thought she'd actually hurt him. Then he stood, brushing bark from his coat, and laughed. That, he said, eyes gleaming with something predatory and proud, is what I've been waiting for. Raw, honest, powerful. He crossed back to her in 3 long strides. How did it feel? Terrifying. Eleanor's hand shook. I could have killed you. You couldn't have. But your belief that you could, that is what makes the magic. Potent. He caught her trembling hands in his. Magic is belief made manifest, Eleanor. You must believe in your own power absolutely, or it will fail you when you need it most. She looked down at their joined hands, his pale and cold, hers warm and scarred, both bearing the matching marks of their covenant. Is that how you survived 3 centuries? Absolute belief in your own power? No. His thumb traced circles on her wrist. I survived through absolute belief in duty. Power alone is hollow, it needs purpose to give it meaning. His silver eyes found hers. For 300 years, my purpose was the boundary, the covenant, protection of the weak against the strong. He paused. But lately, I find my purpose has evolved. Eleanor's pulse quickened. Into what? Into you. The admission was quiet, almost reluctant. Your safety, your growth. The way you look at me as though I'm still capable of being more than a weapon. His hand came up to cup her face, cold fingers gentle, against her flushed cheek. It's dangerous, what's growing between us, for both of us. I know. Eleanor leaned into his touch despite the cold. I feel it too, through the bond and... She gestured helplessly. Beyond it, when you're near, it's like gravity shifted, and you became the center everything orbits around. Eleanor. His voice carried a warning, but his thumb traced her lower lip, and the gesture contradicted any caution his words might have intended. Don't. She caught his wrist, keeping his hand against her face. Don't tell me it's impossible, or dangerous, or that you're a monster. I know all of those things. I've accepted them. What I can't accept is pretending this connection is only about magic and boundaries and war. What else could it be about? But his eyes said he knew exactly what else it could be about. Hope. Eleanor's free hand came up to rest over his silent heart. The possibility that after 3 centuries of winter, you might remember what spring feels like. Isn't that what you said? Lucian closed his eyes, and for a moment he looked almost human, vulnerable, uncertain, achingly alone despite her presence. I'm afraid, he whispered. I've stared down armies without flinching, but the thought of letting you close enough to truly hurt me. He opened his eyes, and they held centuries of loss. Everyone I've cared for has died, Eleanor. Everyone. And I remain, unchanging, bearing the weight of their absence. I don't know if I can survive losing you too. Then don't lose me. She pulled his hand from her face and pressed her scarred palm against his. Light bloomed where they touched, silver and gold intertwined, cold and warm, mortal and immortal. Fight for me the way you fight for that village. Teach me to survive. Give me the tools I need to stand beside you, not behind you. Through their bond, she felt his conflict desire warring with fear, hope clashing against centuries of learned caution. But underneath it all, something else bloomed, determination. Very well. He stepped back, and his expression shifted from vulnerable to focused in a heartbeat. If you want to stand beside me, then you need to understand what you're standing against. Come. He led her deeper into the forest, to a place where moonlight failed to penetrate the canopy and shadow pooled thick as water. Eleanor felt the boundary here too, but weaker this was the edge, the place where protection thinned, and the wild darkness beyond began to seep through. Lucian gestured at the shadows. Reach out. Not with your hand, with your awareness. Tell me what you sense. Eleanor closed her eyes and extended her consciousness the way he'd taught her. At first, she felt only the usual forest sounds wind through leaves, the distant cry of an owl. But then, deeper, she sensed wrongness, hunger, intelligence without compassion, things that waited in the dark for the boundary to fail. There are. She struggled for words. Things. Not vampires, but not animals either. They feel old, ancient, like they were here before humans, before civilization, and they're waiting to reclaim what we took. The unbidden. Lucian's voice was grim. Creatures that exist in the spaces between worlds. Some are merely animalistic, hungry, but not actively malevolent. Others. He moved to a tree marked with deep claw gouges. Others remember when they ruled, and they want that power back. The boundary doesn't just protect Thornhaven from vampires. It protects the entire mortal realm from things that would tear through reality like paper if given the chance. Eleanor's eyes snapped open. You're saying House Crimson isn't the real threat? House Crimson is a threat to Thornhaven's people. But if the boundary falls completely... He turned to face her, and his expression was bleak. The unbidden will pour through. They'll consume the village in hours, then spread like disease. Within a week, they'll have devoured everything within 100 miles. Within a month, they'll be at the gates of London. His hand found hers again. That's what I've really been protecting for 3 centuries. Not just one village, but the membrane between this world and the horrors beyond it. The weight of that revelation staggered her. So every time House Crimson attacks the boundary, they're not just threatening Thornhaven, they're risking unleashing apocalypse. Yes, though most of them are too arrogant to believe it. They think they could control the unbidden, bind them to serve vampire interests. Lucian's laugh was bitter. They're wrong. The unbidden serve nothing but their own hunger. I've seen what happens when they break through. Entire civilizations reduced to ash and screaming in a single night. Eleanor looked out at the shadow-thick forest, at the barely visible line where the boundary's protection ended, and true darkness began. How do we stop them? Both the vampires and the things beyond? Honestly, Lucian moved. Behind her, his hands settling on her shoulders. I don't know. For 3 centuries, I've held the line through sheer stubbornness and the power of the original covenant, but the boundary weakens with each passing year. The old magics fade as humans forget the ways that fed them. And now, his grip tightened. Now I'm fighting a war on 2 fronts, keeping the vampires at bay while ensuring the unbidden don't notice how thin the membrane has become. You need allies. Eleanor turned to face him. Other vampires who understand what's at stake. Humans who remember the old ways. Anyone who... She stopped. Through the bond, she felt a sudden spike of alarm from Lucian. What? Quiet. He pulled her close, wrapping shadow around them both like a cloak. Someone's watching. Eleanor held her breath, pressing against Lucian's chest. Through the bond, she felt him extending his senses, searching for the presence he'd detected. Then she felt it too, a consciousness, ancient and cold, observing them from the darkness beyond the boundary. Not vampire, not unbidden, something else entirely. A voice whispered through the trees, dry as autumn leaves and old as stone. The Winter Lord takes a mortal consort. How? Unexpected. And how very, very dangerous. Lucian tensed. Show yourself, witness. The shadows coalesced into a figure, tall, skeletal, wrapped in robes that seemed woven from midnight itself. Its face was hidden beneath a deep hood, but Eleanor could feel eyes upon her, measuring, judging, finding her wanting. I do not answer to you, Blackthorn. I answer to the compact itself, and the compact is... concerned. The figure drifted closer, and Eleanor caught a scent like ancient parchment and funeral incense. You have bound your fate to a mortal. You have renewed the boundary through blood magic not seen in centuries. You have broken pattern. I've done what was necessary to maintain the boundary. Lucian's voice was carefully neutral, but through the bond Eleanor felt his tension. The compact requires protection. I have provided it. At what cost? The witness turned its hidden gaze on Eleanor, and she felt that regard like ice water in her veins. This mortal carries power she does not understand, power that could heal or harm, create or destroy. And you, Lord Blackthorn, have given her access to magics meant only for those who have lived centuries and learned wisdom. What happens when she makes a mistake? When her mortality fails and the boundary collapses because you were too besotted to see the danger? She is stronger than you assume. Lucian's arm came around Eleanor's waist, protective and possessive, and wiser. She saved the boundary when I could not hold it alone. For now. The witness's robes rippled like disturbed water. But mortality is brief and fragile, Lord Blackthorn. She will age, sicken, die. And when she does, the boundary will shatter unless another mortal can be found to replace her. Have you considered that? Have you planned for the inevitable moment when your heart breaks and the covenant with it? The words hit like physical blows. Through the bond, Eleanor felt Lucian's pain sharp and immediate because he hadn't considered it. He'd been so focused on the immediate crisis that he'd ignored the longer trajectory. There are ways, Eleanor said, surprising herself with how steady her voice emerged. To extend mortal life. My grandmother's books mention... No. The witness's voice cracked like thunder. That path leads only to abomination. Mortals who grasp at immortality through magic become twisted things, neither living nor dead, sustained by forces that exact terrible prices. You would trade your humanity for a few more years, girl. You would become the very thing you've sworn to fight against. I would become whatever is necessary to protect what I love. Eleanor stepped forward, out of Lucian's protective embrace. Whether that's Thornhaven, the boundary, or, she glanced back at Lucian, or the fool vampire who bound himself to a dying covenant because he still believes in honor. The witness was silent for a long moment. Then, impossibly, it laughed a sound like wind through empty tombs. Oh, you are your grandmother's heir indeed. She spoke the same way, 70 years ago, when she renewed the covenant with Blackthorn's predecessor. The figure drifted closer. Very well. The compact will. Observe. You have until the winter solstice to prove that mortal and immortal can indeed work in concert without destroying each other. Fail, and the boundary will be dissolved entirely. Better a clean death than slow corruption. Witness, Lucian began, but the figure was already dissolving. Train her well, Winter Lord. And remember, love is the most dangerous magic of all. It makes fools of the wise and heroes of the craven. Let us see which it makes of you. Then it was gone, and they stood alone in the clearing with the weight of impossible deadlines and the witness's warning hanging between them. Eleanor turned to face Lucian. Your predecessor. The one who held the boundary before you. What happened to him? Lucian's expression was carefully blank. He fell in love with the mortal who renewed the covenant. For 30 years they held the boundary together. Then she died sudden fever, the kind that kills in days, and his voice roughened. He walked into the sunrise 3 days after her funeral. The boundary held for another week, then collapsed completely. It took me 5 years, and the blood of 100 volunteers to rebuild it. Lucian, don't. He pulled away from her, shadow wrapping around him like armor. The witness is right. This connection between us, it's beautiful and terrible and ultimately doomed. You're mortal, Eleanor. Even if you survive the coming war, even if we defeat House Crimson and hold the boundary for the next 50 years, eventually. He couldn't finish the sentence, but Eleanor heard what he couldn't say. Eventually, you'll die and leave me alone again. She crossed to him, taking his cold hands in her warm ones despite his attempt to pull away. Then we'll find a way, she said fiercely. A way that doesn't require me to become a monster or you to become human. A way that lets us stand together for as long as possible. And when the end comes, if it comes, we'll face it with the same courage we're using to face House Crimson. You make it sound simple. It's not simple. It's impossible. Eleanor pulled him closer, until her warmth bled into his cold and their scarred palms pressed together. But we've already accomplished one impossible thing. Why not another? Lucian stared down at her, silver eyes reflecting moonlight and something deeper, hope warring with despair. Desire clashing against duty. Then, slowly, he lowered his forehead to rest against hers. You will be the death of me, he whispered. Or your salvation, Eleanor whispered, back, echoing their earlier conversation. Can it be both? His arms came around her, pulling her close with a desperate strength that spoke of centuries of loneliness finally finding anchor. If I could choose how to fall, he murmured against her hair, I would choose to fall with you. They stood that way as the moon climbed higher and the boundary hummed around them and the witness's deadline ticked inexorably toward winter. Somewhere beyond the thin membrane between worlds, the unbidden stirred. Somewhere in their crimson halls, House Crimson plotted, but for this stolen moment, Eleanor and Lucian held each other against the dark, two impossible things learning that sometimes the greatest magic was simply choosing not to face the end alone. The training would continue. The war would come. But tonight, they had this. Warmth and cold, mortal and immortal, learning to be enough for each other in a world that insisted they could only ever be enemies. And through their bond, silver and gold intertwined, they felt a truth that transcended magic. Love might be the most dangerous power of all, but it was also the only one worth dying for. Or, Eleanor thought as she felt Lucian's arms tighten around her, worth living for. Even if that life was measured in stolen moments between battles, even if every heartbeat brought them closer to an ending they couldn't prevent, it was enough. It had to be enough. Because the alternative, walking away, letting fear win, was a death more final than anything the hunt could inflict. So they stood together in the shadow-thick forest, and they chose hope. However impossible, however doomed, together. The summons came written in blood on her door. Eleanor woke to find the message scrawled in elegant script across the wood, the letters still wet enough to gleam in pre-dawn light. Lady Ashford, your presence is requested at the Court of Mirrors tonight at moonrise. Come alone, come unarmed, come willingly, or we will come for you, with fire and tooth. The choice, as always, is yours. Lady Seraphine of House Crimson. Her hands trembled as she traced the letters, feeling residual magic pulsing beneath the blood. Not a request, a threat dressed in courtesy. Through the bond, she felt Lucian's instant awareness he was awake wherever he sheltered from daylight, already moving toward her with inhuman speed. He materialized in her cottage within moments, fury radiating from him like winter cold. No, it's an invitation. Eleanor kept her voice steady despite her racing heart. Maybe this is an opportunity to negotiate, to find allies within. It's a trap. Lucian gestured at the blood-written words. Seraphine wants revenge for the humiliation I dealt her. She'll torture you for information about the boundary, then drain you slowly while forcing me to watch through our bond. His hands clenched into fists. You're not going. I don't think I have a choice. Eleanor pointed to the bottom of the message, where smaller text had appeared as though seeping through the wood itself. Look. Lucian leaned closer, his expression darkening as he read. P.S. We hold 17 of Thornheaven's children in our halls. Refuse, and we return them in pieces. 1 each hour until you comply. They're bluffing, but Lucian's voice carried uncertainty. Eleanor was already pulling on her cloak, checking the hidden pockets, where she'd begun storing small vials of herbs and remedies. Are they? Can you afford to gamble 17 lives on that assumption? Eleanor, teach me. She turned to face him, and he must have seen something in her expression that gave him pause. We have until moonrise. That's 12 hours. Teach me everything you can about vampire courts, their customs, their weaknesses. Teach me how to survive. For a long moment, Lucian simply stared at her. Then his shoulders sagged infinitesimally, and through the bond Eleanor felt his resignation warring with desperate fear. Very well. His voice was rough. But you won't go alone. I can't enter their halls without invitation. Court law prevents it, but I can get you to the threshold. And I can ensure you have. He paused, seeming to wrestle with some internal debate. Insurance. What kind of insurance? Instead of answering, Lucian held out his wrist. My blood. 3 drops. Taken willingly before you enter their domain. Eleanor's eyes widened. What would that do? It would bind you to me more deeply than the boundary already has. You'd be able to feel my location at all times, to draw on my strength in moments of crisis. And most importantly, his silver eyes found hers. It would mark you as claimed. My blood carries my signature. Any vampire who tastes you would know immediately that you belong to the Winter Court, and harming you would mean declaring war on me personally. But there are side effects. Eleanor could see it in the tension of his jaw. Aren't there? You'd crave my presence, the way Isabella craved her master's bite, but stronger, because our connection already exists. He lowered his wrist. Within days, you'd feel pain when we're separated. Within weeks, you'd need regular contact to maintain your health. It's addictive, binding. Some would call it a form of slavery. And you're offering this willingly? I'm offering you a chance to survive." His voice dropped. "Even if survival means hating me for what I've made you dependent on." Eleanor studied his face, the carefully controlled expression that hid centuries of loneliness, the silver eyes that held both hope and resignation, the mouth that could speak kindness or cruelty with equal ease. She thought about Isabella, about addiction and control and all the ways vampires turned consent into chains. Then she thought about 17 children in crimson halls, waiting to be returned in pieces. 3 drops, she said, and you teach me how to resist the craving, how to maintain myself even with your blood in my system. Lucian's expression flickered surprise, relief, something that might have been love if he'd allowed himself to name it. I don't know if that's possible. Then we'll discover it together. Eleanor extended her hand. We have 12 hours. Let's not waste them. The training was brutal. Lucian pushed her through combat drills, teaching her where vampires were. Vulnerable eyes, throat, the soft tissue behind the knee. He made her practice drawing on the boundary's power while he circled her with predatory intent, made her hold shields while he tested them with casual strikes that would have shattered bone if she'd failed. They'll try to overwhelm you with beauty, he said, demonstrating a glamour that made his already striking features become almost painful to look at angles too perfect, eyes too bright, presence too intense. Vampire magic works through seduction. They'll make you want to please them, to offer your throat willingly. You must hold your sense of self. Against that pressure, Eleanor gritted her teeth as the glamour pressed against her mind like hands trying to reshape clay. How? Remember what you are. Lucian dropped the glamour, and his features returned to their normal impossible beauty. Remember why you're there. Anchor yourself to purpose, and let that purpose be stronger than their illusions. They practiced verbal sparring, the elaborate courtesies and veiled insults that comprised vampire political discourse. Lucian taught her to hear the threat beneath the compliment, to recognize when seemingly innocent questions were actually attempts to extract binding oaths. Never agree to anything without understanding the full terms, he warned. Court law is built on loopholes and technicalities. I'll do what I can is not the same as I'll do what you ask. The first gives you latitude. The second binds you to their will. As afternoon shadows lengthened, Lucian produced a small blade, silver, etched with protective symbols. Hide this in your sleeve. Silver won't kill a vampire, but it burns us badly enough to buy you escape time. I thought you said I should come unarmed. I said they told you to come unarmed. There's a difference between obeying the letter of an order and obeying its spirit. His smile was sharp. You're learning to think like a survivor. Good. Finally, as the sun began its descent and moonrise approached, Lucian led her to the cottage threshold. His expression was grim, jaw tight with barely controlled tension. Last chance to refuse, he said. I could hold the boundary alone. Find another way to... No, Eleanor squeezed his hand. We both know they'll hurt those children just to prove they can. This is the only way. Lucian closed his eyes briefly, and through the bond Eleanor felt his anguish, the certainty that he was sending her into danger he couldn't protect her from, the knowledge that their connection made her a target, the desperate hope that she would somehow survive. What should kill her? The blood, he said quietly. Are you certain? I'm certain. He drew the silver knife across his wrist in one smooth motion. Blood welled immediately darker than human blood, almost black in the fading light, and carrying a scent like winter roses and metal and something indefinable that made Eleanor's mouth water despite herself. 3 drops on your tongue, Lucian instructed, holding his wrist over her upturned face. No more. 3 drops creates connection. More than that begins the transformation. Eleanor opened her mouth. The first drop hit her tongue and exploded with sensation, cold fire racing through her veins, every nerve suddenly alive and singing. She tasted his memories, centuries of winter nights, the weight of duty, loneliness so deep it felt like drowning, and underneath it all, a fierce, desperate love for the mortal woman standing before him. The second drop intensified everything. Eleanor gasped as the bond between them suddenly sang, no longer a thread but a cable of woven steel and silk, connecting them at depths she hadn't known existed. She could feel his heartbeat now slow, steady, impossibly ancient as though it beat inside her own chest. The third drop sealed it. Power flooded through her, and for a moment Eleanor saw the world through vampire senses. The individual molecules of air moving against her skin, the symphony of heartbeats from sleeping villagers miles away, the complex web of magic that comprised the boundary, rendered in crystalline clarity. She felt immortal, Invincible. Eternal. Then Lucian pulled his wrist away and the moment passed, leaving her gasping and transformed in ways she couldn't yet understand. How do you feel? His hand steadied her when she swayed. Powerful. Eleanor's voice emerged steadier than expected. Connected. And she met his eyes. Hungry. Not for blood, but for more of this. More of you. The craving. Lucian's jaw tightened. It will grow stronger over the next few days. You must resist it, Eleanor. What I've given you is protection, not permission to... I know. She touched his face, marveling at how her enhanced senses now perceived him. The subtle movements beneath his skin, the way shadow clung to him like a living thing, the sheer age radiating from his immortal form. I won't let it control me. I promise. He caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her scarred palm. Come back to me, he whispered. Survive this. And I swear I'll find a way to break our dependency. A way to give you freedom even from the chains I've just forged. I don't want freedom from you. The words emerged before wisdom could stop them. I want partnership. Equality. A chance to stand beside you without either of us losing ourselves. Eleanor, his voice broke. Moonrise, she interrupted. Because if they continued this conversation, she would never leave, and children would die. I have to go. Lucian pulled her into his arms one last time, holding her with desperate strength. Through the bond, she felt his terror, the certainty that he was losing her, that this was the beginning of the end, that love and duty had finally demanded a price he couldn't pay. If you don't return by midnight, he said against her hair, I'm coming for you. Court law be damned. I'll burn their halls to ash and carry you out through the ruins. I believe you. Eleanor pulled back just enough to look into his eyes. But I will return. I'm too stubborn to die at someone else's convenience. His laugh was pained but genuine. Yes, you are. The moon began to rise, pale and enormous on the horizon. Eleanor stepped out of Lucian's embrace, squaring her shoulders, feeling his blood singing in her veins and his presence anchored in her heart. The silver knife pressed against her forearm, hidden but accessible. The boundary's power hummed beneath her skin, ready to be called. She was as prepared as 12 hours could make her. The Court of Mirrors lies 3 miles into the forest, Lucian said, his voice taking on the detached tone of tactical briefing. Follow the path marked with white stones. When you reach the gates, speak your full name and state that you come in answer to their summons. They'll grant you entry. Their invitation guarantees safe passage through the threshold, but not safe passage back out. No. His silver eyes held centuries of bitter experience. Not that. Eleanor nodded once, sharp and decisive. Then she turned and walked into the forest, following the path Lucian had described, feeling his gaze on her back until the trees swallowed her completely. The journey took longer than 3 miles should have. The path twisted impossibly, doubling back on itself, leading her through clearings she could have sworn she'd already passed. Vampire magic, she realized, designed to disorient visitors and remind them they traveled at their host's sufferance. But Eleanor had Lucian's blood in her veins now, and with it came a sense of direction that couldn't be fooled by illusion. She followed the true path underneath the false one, and within an hour emerged before gates that should not exist. The Court of Mirrors rose from the forest floor like a fever dream-made architecture. Crystal and obsidian twisted into impossible spires, reflecting moonlight in fractal patterns that hurt to look at directly. The gates themselves were wrought iron shaped into thorns and roses, each bar etched with names victims. Eleanor realized with growing horror. Thousands of names, centuries of prey. 2 guards flanked the entrance, vampires in crimson armor, faces hidden behind masks shaped like screaming faces. They moved with liquid grace as Eleanor approached, crossing their spears to bar her path. State your business, one demanded, voice hollow behind the mask. Eleanor lifted her chin, channeling every ounce of confidence she'd learned from Lucian. I am Eleanor Ashford, heir to the Boundary's covenant, blood marked by the Winter Court. I come in answer to Lady Seraphine's invitation. The guard's postures shifted subtle, but Eleanor's enhanced senses caught it. Surprise, wariness. The crossed spears lifted. You are expected, the second guard said. But know this, mortal, you enter at your own peril. The Court of Mirrors shows all truths, even those you would prefer remained hidden. The gates swung open. Beyond them, Eleanor glimpsed a entrance hall of impossible beauty, floors of polished black marble reflecting chandeliers made of frozen lightning, walls lined with mirrors that showed not her reflection, but possibilities. Eleanor, as vampire, as corpse, as queen, as slave. Music drifted from somewhere deeper in the complex, seductive and wrong, and the air itself seemed to pulse with ancient hunger. Eleanor thought of Lucian, felt his presence through their bond like an anchor in storm. She thought of 17 children who didn't deserve to pay for adult politics. She thought of her grandmother, who'd faced monsters with nothing but herbs and determination. Then she stepped across the threshold into the court of mirrors, and the gates slammed shut behind her with the finality of a coffin closing. The first vampire to greet her was beautiful they all were, she realized, scanning the assembled court. Beautiful and terrible and wearing their age like crowns of thorns. They stood in a great circle around a central dais, and at the dais's peak sat a figure in flowing crimson. Lady Seraphine, Eleanor Ashford. Seraphine's voice carried to every corner of the hall despite conversational volume. How brave of you to accept our invitation. How remarkably stupid. She gestured languidly. Come, let us discuss the terms of your surrender. Eleanor walked forward, every instinct screaming at her to run, feeling hundreds of predatory eyes tracking her movement. The silver knife pressed against her arm. Lucian's blood sang in her veins. And somewhere in the depths of this crystalline nightmare, 17 children waited for salvation or death. I'm coming, Eleanor thought, projecting the promise toward wherever they were held. I'm coming, and I'm bringing help even your captors don't expect. Seraphine's smile widened, showing teeth too sharp to be human. Oh, little mortal, she purred. This is going to be delicious. The court laughed, a sound like breaking glass and funeral bells, and Eleanor walked into the heart of the monster's den, armed with nothing but courage and borrowed blood, and the desperate hope that love might prove stronger than hunger. The true test was beginning, and there would be no mercy if she failed. The Court of Mirrors was a palace built from stolen beauty. Eleanor realized this as she walked the gauntlet between assembled vampires, her enhanced senses picking up details that should have been invisible. The crystal columns pulsed with captured life force. The chandeliers burned with flames that had never known wood or oil souls. She understood with creeping horror, bound to provide eternal light. Even the mirrors lining the walls reflected not just images but essence, showing her 1,000 versions of herself that had never been and might never be. Seraphine watched her approach with the patience of a spider observing a fly's struggle. You carry Winter's mark, she said, tilting her head to inhale deeply. His blood sings in your veins. How? Intimate. Tell me, does Lord Blackthorn taste as cold as his reputation suggests? The assembled court laughed, the sound echoing off crystal walls. Eleanor forced herself to meet Seraphine's gaze without flinching. I wouldn't know. Unlike some, I don't make a habit of sampling those under my protection. The laughter died instantly. Seraphine's eyes flashed red. Careful, mortal. You stand in my domain now, breathing at my sufferance. Winter's mark protects you from casual violence, but there are so many ways to hurt that leave no permanent damage. She gestured, and 2 vampires dragged forward a small figure. Alice Miller. The girl was unconscious, pale as death, bearing fresh bite marks on her throat and wrists, but alive. Eleanor could hear her heartbeat faint, but steady. Your village's children are entertaining, Seraphine continued, so full of hope and terror. Such exquisite flavors when mixed together. She stroked Alice's hair with false tenderness. We've been feeding from them for 3 nights now, just enough to keep them weak, not enough to kill, yet. Eleanor's hands clenched into fists, nails biting into her palms. Through the bond, she felt Lucian's fury. He was somewhere outside the court's wards, pacing like a caged wolf, desperate to tear through walls and reach her. Not yet, she thought toward him. I need to find where they're keeping the others. What do you want? Eleanor asked aloud, forcing her voice to remain level. Want? Seraphine laughed. Oh, so many things. I want Winter's boundary to crumble. I want Thornhaven's blood to run like rivers through our halls. I want Lucian Blackthorn to finally understand that honor is just another word for weakness. She leaned forward, eyes gleaming. But what I want from you, little mortal, is quite specific. She snapped her fingers. A vampire emerged from the shadows carrying a scroll, ancient parchment, yellowed with age and stained with something dark. This is the original covenant, Seraphine explained. The treaty that established the boundary 3 centuries ago. It contains interesting clauses. Protections, certainly, but also obligations. Her smile was sharp as shattered glass. And loopholes. Eleanor's stomach twisted. What kind of loopholes? The kind that say if the mortal heir to the covenant willingly renounces the boundary's protection, it can be dissolved without breaking the cosmic laws that govern such things. Seraphine gestured, and the scroll unrolled before Eleanor, revealing text written in languages that hurt to read. 3 drops of blood, 1 spoken renunciation, and Thornhaven becomes ours to feast upon as we please. You're insane if you think I'll... Before you refuse, consider. Seraphine gestured again, and the mirrors lining the walls suddenly showed new images. The other 16 children, locked in crystal cages throughout the palace, all bearing fresh bite marks. Your compliance buys their freedom. Your refusal buys their eternal torment. We have ways of keeping mortals alive for centuries, Eleanor Ashford. Ways of making each day feel like drowning, each night like burning. Would you condemn 17 children to that fate for the sake of one stubborn village? Eleanor's mind raced. Through the bond, she felt Lucian's response a single word, sharp as a blade. Stall. The covenant requires more than blood and words, Eleanor said carefully, buying time. It requires consent of both mortal and immortal signatories. Even if I renounce the boundary, Lucian. Would never Elias? Lucian is bound by his oath, Seraphine interrupted. If you freely choose to dissolve your half of the covenant, his oath dissolves with it. He cannot hold what you've released. She leaned closer. He's told you he's the protector, hasn't he? The noble guardian? But what he hasn't told you is that his protection is conditional. The moment you no longer want it, he has no right to impose it. That's the price of building your treaty on consent. The words hit like physical blows because Eleanor could feel through the bond that they were true, or at least partially true. The covenant's power flowed from willing partnership. Violate that willing nature, and the entire structure collapsed. There must be another way, Eleanor said. Some compromise that... There is no compromise. Seraphine's facade of civility cracked, revealing raw hunger underneath. For 3 centuries, we've been denied proper hunting grounds because one self-righteous fossil clings to outdated concepts of honor. Do you know what it's like to be immortal and starving? To have endless time but limited feeding? We are predators, girl. Asking us not to hunt is like asking you not to breathe. Then hunt elsewhere. Eleanor gestured at the palace around them. You have power, territory, clearly enough resources to build all this. Why obsess over one small village? Because it's the principle. A new voice, deep as thunder and smooth as honey, rolled through the hall. The assembled vampires parted, revealing a figure that made even Seraphine's beauty seem diminished by comparison. Lord Marcus Crimson, Eleanor presumed, master of this court. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with skin like polished mahogany and eyes that burned like embers. His crimson robes seemed woven from liquid fire, and power radiated from him in waves that made Eleanor's knees want to buckle. Miss Ashford. He descended from some upper gallery, moving with the fluid grace of water flowing downhill. Forgive my subordinates' enthusiasm. Seraphine tends toward the theatrical. He shot the female vampire a look that made her flinch. But she's correct about the fundamental issue. The boundary is a relic. A limitation placed on our kind by fearful humans who've since forgotten why they should fear us. He stopped a few feet from Eleanor, close enough that she could feel the heat rolling off him, not cold like Lucian, but burning like banked coals. The world is changing, Miss Ashford. Your kind builds machines that pierce the night. You map territories we once claimed as mystery. You explain with science what was once only known through magic. His smile held genuine sadness. Soon, there will be no room left for creatures like us. We must secure our hunting grounds now, while we still can. By slaughtering innocents? Eleanor demanded. By turning children into blood banks? By surviving? Lord Crimson's expression hardened. I am 4,000 years old, girl. I have watched civilizations rise and fall. I have seen humanity go from cowering in caves to building cities that scrape the sky. And I have learned one absolute truth. Adapt or perish. He gestured at his court. We adapt. We claim territory. We ensure our survival through strength, because mercy is a luxury predators cannot afford. Lucian affords it. Lucian is dying. The words fell like stones into still water. Perhaps not today. Perhaps not this century. But his philosophy is extinction disguised as nobility. He protects mortals until he becomes expendable. Then he'll be cast aside and forgotten. I would rather be feared and fed than loved and starving. Eleanor studied him, her enhanced senses parsing truth from performance. Lord Crimson believed what he said absolutely, completely. To him, violence wasn't cruelty, it was survival. And asking him to change was like asking the tide not to rise. But Lucian had learned differently. Lucian had found another way. You're wrong, Eleanor said, quietly. About Lucian dying. About mercy being weakness. You've survived 4,000 years through strength, but he's survived 3 centuries through connection. The boundary doesn't make him expendable, it makes him essential. People need him, and that need gives him purpose stronger than any amount of fear could provide. Lord Crimson regarded her with something that might have been respect. You love him. How extraordinary. He circled her slowly, predatory and curious. A mortal loving a monster. It's like watching a lamb defend the wolf. He stopped directly behind her, voice dropping to a whisper. Tell me, Eleanor Ashford, what happens when that love fails? When you age and he doesn't? When you die and he continues? Will your love sustain him then? Or will it break him more thoroughly than any enemy could? The words hit precisely because they echoed Eleanor's own fears. Through the bond, she felt Lucian's anguish. He'd heard every word, felt every doubt, and the pain of it nearly drove him to his knees wherever he waited. Don't listen, his thoughts whispered desperately. Don't let him poison my love will sustain him, Eleanor said aloud, as much for Lucian as for Lord Crimson, because it's not built on immortality or perfection. It's built on choice. Every day, I choose him, and every day, he chooses the harder path of protection over the easy path of predation. That's worth more than 4,000 years of survival. Silence crashed down. The assembled court stared at her, as though she'd spoken heresy, which Eleanor realized, in their world she had. Lord Crimson laughed, the sound genuine and almost fond. Oh, you are delightful. No wonder winter marked you. He moved back around to face her. Very well. I'll make you a different offer, one your conscience might actually accept. He gestured, and the mirrors shifted, showing Eleanor a new image. Lucian, standing at the court's outer wards, wrapped in shadow and barely controlled. Violence. Trial by combat, Lord Crimson said. Old law but still binding. You champion Thornhaven's protection. I champion our right to hunt. We each choose a warrior. They fight at dawn, in neutral territory, until one yields or dies. His smile was sharp. If your champion wins, I withdraw House Crimson's claim on Thornhaven for 50 years. If mine wins, the boundary dissolves and the village is ours. Eleanor's mind raced. And the children? Released regardless of outcome. You came when summoned that bought them their lives, though not their freedom from nightmares. He extended his hand. Do we have a cord? It was a trap. It had to be. But Eleanor could see no other way forward that didn't end with 17 children suffering eternal torment, or the boundary collapsing through her forced renunciation. Through the bond, she felt Lucian's desperate message. Don't agree. I can fight him. But Lord Crimson was 4,000 years old. Lucian was barely 3 centuries. The outcome was obvious. Unless... I accept, Eleanor said, with one modification. I don't choose Lucian as my champion. Lord Crimson's eyebrows rose. Oh? Then who? Eleanor met his burning gaze steadily, gambling everything on a truth she'd only just understood. Myself. The court erupted into laughter, mocking, disbelieving, cruel. Even Seraphine looked stunned. But Lord Crimson's expression shifted to something like intrigue. A mortal challenging a vampire to single combat? That's not bravery, Miss Ashford. That's suicide. Perhaps. Eleanor lifted her scarred palm, letting the silver scar catch the light. Or perhaps I'm not entirely mortal anymore. I carry the boundary's power. I bear winter's mark. And I have 3 drops of ancient blood singing in my veins. She smiled, channeling every ounce of Lucian's predatory confidence. I may not be vampire, but I'm not entirely human either. So yes, Lord Crimson, I challenge your right to hunt Thornhaven, and I'll prove with blood, and magic that protection is stronger than predation. The laughter died. The court watched with sudden, avid interest. Lord Crimson studied her for a long moment, then slowly smiled a genuine expression of delight. You are either the bravest fool I've met in a millennium, or the most dangerous mortal currently living. I'm genuinely uncertain which. He extended his hand. Dawn, the eastern clearing at the boundary's edge. You against my champion, witnessed by both courts. His grip was warm, almost burning. I look forward to seeing what winter has made of you. Eleanor shook his hand, sealing the bargain, feeling power snap into place around the agreement binding magic, ensuring neither party could back out without cosmic consequences. Through the bond, she felt Lucian's absolute terror and furious pride warring in equal measure. What have you done? His thoughts screamed. Bought us time, she thought back, and a chance to win on our terms. Lord Crimson released her hand. You're free to leave. The children will be returned to Thornhaven within the hour, bearing our mark as proof of our hospitality. His smile was sharp. Get some rest, Eleanor Ashford. Dawn comes quickly, and you'll need every advantage you can scrape together. Eleanor turned and walked back through the gauntlet of assembled vampires, feeling their hungry eyes tracking her, hearing their whispered wagers on how quickly she would die. The gates opened before her, and she stepped out into the forest, into the night, into the waiting arms of a vampire lord who pulled her against him with desperate strength. You fool, Lucian gasped against her hair. You beautiful, brave, idiotic fool. You can't fight Lord Crimson's champion. You can't. I can. Eleanor pulled back just enough to meet his wild silver eyes. Because you're going to teach me. We have until dawn. That's 6 hours. She gripped his shoulders. 6 hours to teach me everything you know about vampire combat. 6 hours to turn me into a weapon that can actually win this fight. Eleanor, even if I teach you everything, even if you master techniques that took me decades to learn, you're still mortal, still fragile, still your partner. She pressed her scarred palm against his. Still bound to the boundary, still carrying your blood and the Covenant's power. I'm not helpless, Lucian. I'm just inexperienced. Her smile was fierce. So, let's fix that. Fast. Lucian stared at her, emotions cycling too quickly to name. Then, slowly, his expression hardened into something focused and deadly. 6 hours, he said quietly. Then we turn you into something that can make immortals bleed. He pulled her deeper into the forest, toward some training ground she sensed more than saw, and Eleanor felt through their bond what he didn't say aloud. If you die tomorrow, I'm coming for them all. Every vampire in that court. I'll burn their palace to ash and dance in the ruins. I'm not going to die, she thought back. Fiercely. Promise me. I promise. Eleanor squeezed his hand. Because we're going to win this. Together. His lips brushed her forehead, part benediction, part prayer. Then the training began in earnest, and Eleanor learned exactly how brutal immortal combat could be when survival was measured in heartbeats and victory in blood. Dawn was coming, and with it, a reckoning that would determine the fate of everyone she'd sworn to protect. She had 6 hours to become a warrior, and a lifetime of stubbornness to ensure she survived long enough to use what she learned. The forest watched. The boundary hummed. And somewhere in the depths of the Court of Mirrors, Lord Crimson smiled, already anticipating the exquisite entertainment of watching a mortal girl try to fight fate itself. It would be glorious, one way or another. The training ground was a circle of ancient stones deep in the forest, where moonlight fell like silver rain and the boundary's power thrummed strongest. Lucian stood in the radic center, stripped to his shirt sleeves, looking every inch the predator he was. 6 hours isn't enough time to teach you proper combat, but it might be enough to teach you how to survive long enough to win. Eleanor unbuttoned her cloak, the night air cold against her skin. What's the difference? Proper combat is technique, form, years of practice building muscle memory. He moved with liquid grace, demonstrating a complex strike pattern too fast for mortal eyes to fully track. Survival is instinct, desperation, and using every advantage, fair or foul, to stay alive one more second. His silver eyes found hers. I'm going to teach you to cheat, Eleanor, because that's the only way you'll walk away from this. Who will Lord Crimson choose as his champion? Lucian's expression darkened. Probably Marcus himself. He's the strongest vampire in the Crimson Court, and he won't risk losing this wager. But there's a possibility he'll choose someone else, someone built specifically for killing. Like who? Lady Ravenna, his master of arms. Lucian began to circle her slowly. She's 2,000 years old, trained in every combat style humans have invented, and she's never lost a duel. She doesn't feed on blood anymore, she feeds on the life force of those she kills in battle. 30 seconds in a fight with her and you'll feel your strength draining, your will eroding, your very soul starting to fray. Eleanor's mouth went dry. That's what you think I can survive? I think you can surprise her. He stopped directly in front of Eleanor. Because Ravenna expects opponents who fight with strength and speed. She's prepared for vampires. She is not prepared for someone who wields the boundary itself as a weapon. Understanding dawned. You want me to channel the boundary's power into combat magic. Not just channel, become it. Lucian took her scarred hand, pressing it against his chest where a heart should beat. The boundary is part of you now. You renewed it, with blood and will. That means you can call on its protection, its strength, its absolute rejection of anything that threatens what it guards. His eyes burned with intensity. You are not just fighting for yourself tomorrow. You're fighting as the boundary's avatar, its living will made flesh. And that, Eleanor, makes you far more dangerous than Ravenna realizes. How do I access that power? The same way you access any magic through sacrifice. He released her hand. But first, you need to understand what you're facing. Attack me. What? Attack me with everything you have. Magic, physical force, whatever instinct tells you to use. His smile was sharp. And I'll show you why you're going to lose if you fight like a mortal. Eleanor hesitated only a moment. Then she reached for the boundary's power, feeling it surge through her veins like liquid fire, and threw a bolt of pure force at Lucian's chest. He caught it with one hand, not blocking, catching, as though her magic were a physical object he could simply pluck from the air. Then he crushed it, and the power dissipated like smoke. Too slow, he said conversationally. Ravenna will see that coming from a mile away. He moved, and suddenly he was behind Eleanor, hand at her throat. And while you were throwing magic, I could have killed you 3 different ways. He released her, stepping back. Again, faster this time. For the next hour, Eleanor attacked repeatedly with magic, with the silver knife Lucian had given her, with desperate physical strikes that he deflected with insulting ease. Each time, he demonstrated exactly how she would have died if he'd been trying to kill her. Your magic is powerful but unfocused, he explained after catching another bolt of force. It's like throwing a bucket of water at someone when you should be using a blade made of ice. Precision over power, Eleanor. Always. Then teach me precision. Lucian smiled, genuinely pleased. Now you're learning. He moved to one of the ancient stones, placing his palm against it. The stone began to glow. Feel the boundary here. Not as a general presence, but as individual threads of power. Each thread has a purpose, protection, warning, binding. Learn to pull single threads instead of yanking the whole tapestry. Eleanor placed her hand beside his, closing her eyes. At first, she felt only the overwhelming surge of power too much, too chaotic. But as she focused, individual threads began to emerge from the tangle. One thread hummed with defensive energy, another pulsed with aggressive force, a third whispered of binding and constraint. She pulled on the defensive thread. Light erupted around her, not explosive, but contained, forming a shell of translucent energy that wrapped her body like a second skin. Good. Lucian's voice carried approval. That's a shield ward. It'll deflect physical attacks and minor magic. But he struck out, faster than before, and his fist punched through the shield, like paper. It won't stop a vampire putting serious strength behind their blow. For that you need layered defenses. They worked on building shields within shields, outer layers to slow attacks, inner layers to deflect, core layers to absorb what got through. Eleanor's arms ached from holding the magic, sweat soaking through her dress despite the cold, but she forced herself to continue. How long can I maintain this? She gasped. As long as your will holds. Lucian circled her protected form, examining the shields critically. Magic isn't about physical endurance, it's about mental fortitude. Your body will tire, yes, but the magic flows from conviction, not muscle. As long as you believe you can hold, you can hold. What happens if my conviction falters? Then you die. He said it without inflection, as simple fact. Which is why we're going to spend the next hour breaking your conviction repeatedly, so you learn to rebuild it instantly. The training became brutal. Lucian attacked without warning, appearing from shadow, striking from impossible angles, using every vampiric advantage to overwhelm her defenses. Each time Eleanor's shields shattered, he made her rebuild them while he continued the assault. Each time she fell, he forced her back to her feet. Your body is mortal, he said, pressing her hard enough that she could barely breathe. But your will can be immortal. Pain is temporary. Death is abstract. But purpose is eternal. Remember why you're fighting. Let that memory fuel you when everything else fails. Eleanor thought of Alice Miller and the other children, bearing bite marks and nightmares. She thought of Thornhaven's people, sleeping unaware of the monsters at their borders. She thought of Lucian, who'd carried this burden alone for 3 centuries, and now finally had someone to share it with. The shields blazed brighter. Yes. Lucian's voice carried fierce pride. That's it. Anchor yourself to purpose. Let love and duty and stubborn determination fuel your magic. Ravenna will try to drain your strength, but she can't drain what matters most, the reason you refuse to fall. As the night wore on, Eleanor learned to layer shields while attacking, to draw on the boundary's power without telegraphing her intent, to move like water and strike like lightning. She learned where vampires were vulnerable not just physically, but magically. Silver disrupted their essence. Iron bound them temporarily. Salt created barriers they couldn't easily cross. Use the environment, Lucian instructed, showing her how to draw power from the earth itself. The boundary touches everything within its circle. That means every tree, every stone, every handful of dirt is a potential weapon if you know how to channel it. They practiced until Eleanor could raise a wall of thorned vines from bare ground, until she could command stones to fly at her target, until she could draw on the boundary's rejection of threat and project it as a wave of force that sent even Lucian stumbling backward. Your creativity is your greatest advantage, he said, helping her to her feet after a particularly exhausting drill. Ravenna has fought for 2 millennia using the same techniques. She expects certain patterns. Give her something she's never seen before, and you might surprise her long enough to land a killing blow. Can I kill her? Eleanor asked quietly. I know silver and iron hurt vampires, but what actually ends them permanently? Lucian's expression grew grave. Decapitation. Complete destruction of the heart. Fire hot enough to reduce them to ash. Sunlight. He paused. Or magic powerful enough to unravel their immortal essence, but that requires either tremendous power or intimate knowledge of the vampire's true name. Do you know Ravenna's true name? No. True names are secrets vampires guard more carefully than any treasure. His hand found hers. But Eleanor, if it comes down to killing or being killed, remember this. You are protecting more than just yourself. The boundary flows through you. If you die, it weakens catastrophically. You must survive, even if survival requires killing. Eleanor nodded, swallowing hard. She'd never killed before, had spent her whole life healing, not harming. But tomorrow, that would have to change. As the hours passed and the eastern sky began to pale with the barest hint of pre-dawn gray, Lucian called a halt. That's all the time we have, he said quietly. How do you feel? Eleanor took inventory. Her body ached. Her magic felt raw and overused, like a muscle worked past exhaustion. But underneath the fatigue, she felt something else. Confidence. Not certainty of victory, but certainty of her own capability. I feel ready, she said. Lucian pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly. Through their bond, she felt his terror. He'd masked it during training, hidden it behind the role of instructor, but now it flooded through. Absolute, paralyzing, the fear that he was about to lose her. I can't watch you die, he whispered against her hair. I've watched too many people I cared for die. I can't survive that again. Then don't watch. Eleanor pulled back to cup his face in her hands. Stand with me. Lend me your strength through our bond. Trust that I can do this. Eleanor, I love you. The words emerged simply, without ceremony, as natural as breathing. I don't know when it happened, between blood-stained roses and impossible magic, and you teaching me to fight like a demon. But I love you, Lucian Blackthorn, and I refuse to die before I've had a chance to see where this love leads. His eyes widened, silver catching the first rays of approaching dawn. For a moment, he simply stared at her, as though she'd spoken in languages he couldn't comprehend. Then his hand came up to cover hers, pressing her palm against his cold cheek. I have loved you since the moment you chose to stay, he said hoarsely. Since you looked at a monster offering death and saw a man offering protection. Since you bled on ancient stones and bound your mortality to my eternity without hesitation. His thumb traced her lips. I love you with everything I have left that remembers how to love. And if you die tomorrow, I won't. But if you do, he continued, voice breaking, know that you were worth it. Every moment of fear, every impossible choice, every second of this doomed connection, you were worth all of it. He kissed her then, and it was nothing like the gentle touches they'd shared before. This was desperation and desire and the absolute certainty that they might never have another chance. His lips were cold against hers, but the passion behind them burned hotter than any mortal heat. Eleanor kissed him back with equal fervor, pouring everything she couldn't say into the contact, her fear and her hope, and her absolute refusal to let this be goodbye. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, though only Eleanor actually needed air, the sky had lightened to pearl gray. Dawn was minutes away. It's time, Lucian said. They walked together to the eastern clearing, where the boundary met the forest proper. Already, vampires had gathered Lord Crimson's entire court, standing in shadow beneath hastily erected pavilions that blocked the rising sun. On the opposite side, Eleanor saw figures she hadn't expected, villagers from Thornhaven, led by Alice Miller's mother, coming to witness the fight that would determine their fate. And at the clearing center, waiting with predatory patience, stood a woman who could only be Ravenna. She was tall, nearly 6 feet, with skin like burnished bronze and hair that flowed like liquid night. Scars covered her exposed arms, each one a trophy from battles won. Her eyes were the color of dried blood, and when she smiled, her fangs gleamed like ivory knives. Eleanor Ashford. Ravenna's voice was silk over steel. I've heard so much about you, the mortal who dared challenge a vampire to single combat. She drew a sword from her back, black iron etched with runes that hurt to look at. I promise to make your death quick, out of respect for your courage, if not your intelligence. Lord Crimson stepped forward, acting as officiant. The terms are clear. Combat until yield or death. The victor claims either Thornhaven's protection or its surrender. His burning eyes swept the assembled witnesses. Let none interfere on pain of permanent banishment from both courts. The duel begins at first light. The sun's first ray broke over the horizon. Begin, Lord Crimson commanded. Ravenna moved. One moment she stood 20 feet away. The next, she was directly in front of Eleanor, sword descending in an arc that would have split her skull if Eleanor hadn't thrown up a shield on pure instinct. The blade struck the barrier with enough force to send shockwaves through Eleanor's arms. Cracks spider-webbed across the shield's surface. Layer it. Lucian's voice whispered through their bond. Don't rely on one defense. Eleanor poured more power into the shield, creating the layered defenses Lucian had taught her. The sword struck again, shattering the outer layer but stopping at the second. Ravenna's eyes narrowed. Interesting. You actually have some skill. She attacked in earnest, sword moving faster than Eleanor's mortal eyes could track, each strike testing a different angle. Eleanor gave ground, focusing entirely on defense, studying Ravenna's patterns. The vampire was right-handed, favored high strikes, and had a tell before each major attack, a fractional tensing of her shoulders. Good, Lucian's thoughts encouraged. Learn her, then counter. On the 15th strike, Eleanor saw her opening. As Ravenna's shoulder tensed for another overhead blow, Eleanor didn't just block. She stepped inside the swing's arc and drove her palm against Ravenna's chest, releasing a concentrated burst of force. The vampire flew, backward, hitting the ground and rolling to her feet with inhuman grace. Blood trickled from the corner of her mouth. You made me bleed, Ravenna said, sounding almost pleased. Do you know how long it's been since someone made me bleed? She discarded the sword. Let's make this interesting, Ravenna purred, and her form began to change. Eleanor watched in horror as the vampire's body elongated, limbs becoming more angular, fingers extending into claws like obsidian knives. Her jaw distended, revealing rows of teeth designed for tearing. This wasn't the beautiful monster from before, this was the predator without its human mask. This is what we truly are, Ravenna hissed, voice no longer human. And this is how you die. She lunged with speed that made her previous attacks seem lazy, and Eleanor barely managed to throw herself aside. Claws raked across her shoulder, tearing through fabric and skin with equal ease. Pain exploded through her arm. Through the bond, she felt Lucian's anguish. He experienced her pain as though it were his own, and she felt him fighting the urge to break the duel's rules and intervene. Stay there, Eleanor commanded through their connection. I can do this. She reached deep into the boundary's power, not just drawing on a single thread but grabbing multiple strands and weaving them together. The wound on her shoulder began to close, not healed, but sealed by magic, buying her time. Ravenna circled, now moving on all fours like some nightmare cat. Your magic is impressive for a mortal, but you're still bleeding, still tiring. How long can you maintain this before your body fails? Eleanor didn't answer with words. Instead, she remembered Lucian's lesson about using the environment. She reached out to the trees surrounding the clearing and pulled. Roots erupted from the earth, reaching for Ravenna like wooden serpents. The vampire dodged the first several, but Eleanor kept summoning more, a forest of grasping limbs, all trying to bind and trap. One root caught Ravenna's ankle. The vampire snarled, ripping free, but 3 more wrapped around her torso. Eleanor poured more power into them, commanding them to squeeze, to crush, to bind this threat, until Ravenna screamed, and the sound was magic, a psychic assault that shattered Eleanor's concentration and sent the roots withering back into the earth. Eleanor fell to her knees, hands pressed against her ears, feeling like her skull was splitting open. Did you think roots and parlor tricks would be enough? Ravenna stalked forward, her monstrous form casting a shadow that seemed to swallow light. I've been killing for 2,000 years, girl. I've forgotten more about combat than you'll ever learn. She raised a clawed hand for the killing blow. Eleanor looked up at death approaching and thought of everything she was fighting for the village, the children, the boundary, Lucian. She thought of her grandmother's last words. Some stones are better left, unturned. But if you must turn them, be prepared to shoulder what you find beneath. She'd found monsters. She'd found magic. She'd found love in the last place anyone would expect, and she refused to let any of it go. Eleanor reached not for the boundary's power, not for Lucian's strength, but for something deeper, for the covenant itself. The ancient agreement between mortal and immortal that had birthed the boundary 3 centuries ago. She reached for the promise at its heart, that some things were worth protecting, even at terrible cost. The world went white. When Eleanor's vision cleared, she was standing, though she didn't remember rising. Her scarred palm blazed with light bright enough to rival the rising sun, and from that light, a blade had formed not metal, but solidified magic, pure protection given cutting edge. Ravenna had frozen mid-strike, staring at the blade with something Eleanor had never expected to see in a vampire's eyes. Fear. That's impossible. Ravenna breathed. That's the covenant blade. It hasn't manifested in 300 years. You mortals don't have the power to. I'm not just mortal anymore, Eleanor said, and her voice echoed with harmonics that suggested multiple speakers herself, and every boundary guardian who'd come before. I am the covenant's heir, its protector, its living will. She raised the blade, and I will not let you break what I've sworn to guard. She moved, not with Ravenna's impossible speed, but with something else, certainty. The blade cut through space like it cut through resistance, and Eleanor struck not where Ravenna was, but where she would be. The blade pierced Ravenna's chest. The vampire shrieked not in pain, but in shock, as the magic began to unravel her immortal essence. Her monstrous form rippled, trying to hold shape, but the blade was made of pure covenant law, and covenant law said, "Those who threaten the protected shall find no purchase here." Yield, Eleanor commanded, her voice still carrying those impossible harmonics. Yield or be unmade. For a heartbeat, she thought Ravenna would refuse, would let herself be destroyed rather than surrender. But then the vampire's form collapsed back to human shape, and she fell to her knees. I yield, Ravenna gasped. I yield. Mercy, heir of the covenant. I yield. Eleanor pulled the blade back, and the moment it left Ravenna's flesh, the magic dissipated. The wound remained a burning hole through the vampire's chest that would take weeks to heal, but Ravenna lived. Eleanor stood over her fallen opponent, breathing hard, barely able to process what had just happened. The covenant blade had come when she needed it most, had given her the power to match a 2,000-year-old warrior. But at what cost? She looked down at her hands and saw that they were aging skin growing thin and papery, veins becoming prominent. The magic had drawn on her life force, burning through years of her mortality to fuel in itself. Eleanor, Lucian's voice screamed through their bond. She turned toward him, swaying, and saw absolute horror in his silver eyes as he realized what the magic had cost her. Lord Crimson stepped forward, his expression unreadable. The duel is concluded. Victory to Eleanor Ashford, champion of Thornhaven. His burning eyes found hers. The boundary stands. House Crimson withdraws its claim for 50 years. As agreed, he should have sounded angry, defeated. Instead, he sounded intrigued. But know this, young heir, you've shown us something we thought lost. The Covenant Blade's manifestation means the old magic is not as dead as we believed. His smile was sharp. That changes everything. Before Eleanor could ask what he meant, her legs gave out. The world tilted sideways, and she had just enough time to feel Lucian catch her before darkness claimed her completely. She fell into unconsciousness, hearing two voices in perfect harmony. Lucian's, whispering desperately, "Stay. With me. Please. Stay with me." And her own, answering from some deep place beyond awareness. "Always." Then nothing. Just darkness, and the fading echo of a promise she desperately hoped she could keep. Eleanor woke to candlelight and the scent of herbs. Her grandmother's cottage. Her own bed. But wrong. Somehow the light too bright, the smells too sharp, every sensation amplified to painful clarity. She tried to sit up and gasped as her body protested with 1,000 small agonies. "Don't move." Lucian's voice, rough with exhaustion and something deeper. Relief, maybe. Or fear. He sat beside her bed, still wearing the same clothes from the duel, now stained with her blood. His face was drawn, haggard in a way she'd never seen, as though he'd aged years in the hours since dawn. When he reached out to touch her face, his hand trembled. "How long?" Eleanor's voice emerged as a rasp. 3 days. He helped her drink water, his touch infinitely gentle. "You've been unconscious for 3 days. Your body was." "Eleanor, the magic aged you." "Not dramatically, but enough. You lost perhaps 5 years, maybe more." His jaw tightened. "I couldn't stop it, couldn't reverse it. All I could do was watch you burn through your own life force and pray you'd wake up." Eleanor looked down at her hands. They were still hers, but different, the skin slightly less supple, tiny lines at the knuckles that hadn't been there before. 5 years, gone in an instant, traded for the power to manifest a weapon of pure Covenant law. "Was it worth it?" she asked quietly. "Don't." Lucian's voice cracked. "Don't ask me to measure your life against anything. There is no equation where losing years of you is acceptable. But we won. Yes." He stood abruptly, moving to the window to stare out at darkness. "House Crimson has withdrawn. The children are home, recovering. The boundary stands stronger than it has in decades, apparently manifesting the Covenant Blade-fed power back into the wards." His hands clenched on the windowsill. "And you paid for it with pieces of your mortality. That's not victory, Eleanor. That's sacrifice." Eleanor struggled to sit up properly, ignoring her body's protests. "You've been making sacrifices for 3 centuries. Why is mine any different?" "Because I'm immortal." He spun to face her, and his eyes blazed with fury and anguish. "I have endless time to spend. You have decades at best, and now..." His voice dropped to a whisper. "Now you have less. Because of me. Because I taught you magic that consumed you. Because I let you fight when I should have..." "Should have what?" Eleanor cut him off. "Fought in my place? Died trying to defeat Ravenna while I watched helplessly? Lucian, I chose this. Every step. The Covenant renewal, the blood bond, the duel, all of it was my choice. Informed by my influence." He moved back to the bedside, kneeling so they were eye level. "You fell in love with a monster, Eleanor. And monsters poison. Everything they touch, even when they're trying to protect." Eleanor reached out to cup his face, feeling the familiar cold of his skin, the subtle tremor that suggested he was holding himself together by threads. "You didn't poison me. You freed me. From a life of just surviving, just going through the motions of existing after my grandmother died." Her thumb traced his cheekbone. "You gave me purpose. Magic. A reason to be extraordinary instead of ordinary. At the cost of years you'll never get back. And I'd pay that cost again." She leaned forward despite the pain, pressing her forehead against his. "Because those years bought us 50 years of protection for Thornhaven. Because they proved that the old magic isn't dead. Because they showed every vampire watching that mortals can still stand against immortals and win." She pulled back to meet his eyes. "That matters more than 5 years of my life." Lucian closed his eyes, and Eleanor felt moisture on her hands. Tears. He was. crying silently, without sound, but genuine tears nonetheless. "I can't lose you," he whispered. "Not now. Not when I've finally found someone who sees me as more than a weapon or a monster. I can't." His voice broke completely. Eleanor pulled him closer, wrapping her arms around him, holding him while 3 centuries of repressed grief finally found release. He shook against her, fingers digging into her back with desperate strength, and through their bond she felt the absolute depths of his terror, not of death or defeat, but of isolation, of returning to the endless loneliness he'd endured before her. "You won't lose me," she murmured against his hair. "I'm not going anywhere. 5 years, 50 years, whatever time I have left, I'm spending it with you, fighting beside you, loving you." She tilted his face up to meet hers. "That's a promise, Lucian Blackthorn, and I don't break my promises." He kissed her then desperately, hungrily, as though trying to pour every emotion he couldn't articulate into the contact. Eleanor kissed back with equal fervor, tasting salt from his tears and something else underneath a faint copper tang that made her realize how hungry she was. Not for food. For him, the craving hit like a physical blow, a need so intense it bordered on pain. She wanted his blood, his essence, wanted to drink from the source until the emptiness inside her was filled. It was the addiction he'd warned her about, amplified by their bond and her depleted state. Lucian pulled back immediately, sensing her need through their connection. "No. Eleanor, no, you're not ready. Your body can't handle more of my blood right now. I can feel it calling to me." Eleanor's voice was strained. "The 3 drops you gave me, they're not enough anymore. I need more. I need..." She pressed her hand against his chest, feeling the slow beat of his heart. "Please, if I give you more now, while you're weakened, it could accelerate the addiction. Make you dependent beyond what I can help you resist." His hands framed her face. "I won't do that to you. I won't make you into what Isabella was, a slave to the craving. Then what do I do?" Eleanor felt the hunger gnawing at her, insistent and maddening. "How do I make this stop?" "You don't." Lucian's expression was bleak. "You endure it. You fight it. And when your body has recovered enough, when your strength has returned, we'll find a way to manage the bond so it doesn't control you." He pressed a kiss to her forehead. "But I will not feed you when you're vulnerable. That's a line I won't cross, no matter how much you beg." The refusal hurt not because Eleanor doubted his reasoning, but because the craving painted his refusal as rejection. She could feel the addiction trying to reshape her thoughts, to make her see his protection as cruelty. "I hate this," she whispered. "I hate needing you like this. I know." His voice carried infinite sadness. "I hate it too, but we'll find a way through, together." He helped her lie back down. "For now, you need normal food, water, rest. I've been giving you what sustenance I could while you were unconscious, but your body needs to rebuild what the magic consumed." A knock at the door interrupted them. Lucian tensed, positioning himself between Eleanor and the entrance. "Miss Ashford?" A familiar voice, Sarah Miller. "I've brought food, and some of us wanted to thank you for what you did." Lucian looked to Eleanor, silently asking permission. She nodded, and he opened the door. Sarah entered carrying a basket, followed by Alice and several other villagers, including old Thomas, who Eleanor hadn't expected to see standing, much less walking. They clustered in the doorway, uncertain but determined. "We saw the duel," Sarah said quietly. "From the edge of the clearing. We saw you face that monster and win." She set the basket on the bedside table. "We saw you age before our eyes, burning yourself up to protect us. And we wanted you to know. That matters. What you did matters." Alice stepped forward, clutching something wrapped in cloth. "The children, all 17 of us, we made you this. To say thank you." She unwrapped it to reveal a crude carving. Eleanor and Lucian standing back to back, surrounded by a circle of protective symbols. "It's not much," Alice continued, "but we wanted you to know. You're not alone in this fight. We see you. We see what you're sacrificing. And we won't forget." Eleanor felt tears burning in her eyes. She'd fought for these people, had bled and aged and nearly died for them, but somehow, she hadn't expected gratitude, hadn't expected recognition of the cost. "Thank you," she managed. "All of you. That means more than you know." The villagers left their gifts, food, medicines, small tokens of appreciation, then departed quietly. leaving Eleanor and Lucian alone once more with the carved figures standing sentinel on her nightstand. "You have allies," Lucian said softly. "Perhaps not powerful ones, but genuine ones nonetheless. That's rarer than you might think." Eleanor stared at the carving, at the way the artist had depicted her and Lucian together equal partners despite their differences. "Do you have allies? Beyond me and the villagers?" Lucian's expression grew distant. "Once, yes. Other vampires who believed in the Covenant's ideals, but most have been destroyed over the centuries, victims of internal court politics or hunted down by those who saw their philosophy as weakness." He moved to pour her water from a pitcher. "There are a few scattered throughout the world remnants of the old ways, surviving in shadows, but not enough to matter in a fight against the major houses. What if we found them?" Eleanor accepted the water, drinking deeply. "What if we reached out, rebuilt the network of Covenant keepers? We just proved that the old magic still works. Maybe that's enough to rally support. That would require traveling beyond the boundary, leaving Thornhaven vulnerable while we searched for allies who might not exist anymore." He sat beside her again. "And it would require you to be strong enough to travel, which you're not. Not yet. But eventually?" He studied her face, clearly wrestling with conflicting desires to keep her safe versus to acknowledge her agency. "Finally," he nodded. "Eventually, when you've recovered, when we've found a way to manage your addiction to my blood, when the boundary has stabilized enough that I can leave it for short periods." His hand found hers. "But Eleanor, you need to understand the world beyond Thornhaven is not kind to mortals who consort with vampires. There are hunter organizations, religious orders, even human governments that would see you as corrupted, as needing to be saved from my influence. Let them try." Eleanor squeezed his hand. "I didn't survive Ravenna just to be intimidated by humans who think they know what's best for me." Lucian's smile was genuine, if tinged with concern. "You're going to be the death of me, or my salvation. I still haven't decided which." "Why not both?" Eleanor echoed their familiar refrain, and for the first time since waking, she felt something like hope. They sat together in comfortable silence as night deepened outside. Eleanor ate the food the villagers had brought simple fare, but it tasted like the finest feast after days of unconsciousness. Lucian watched her with the intensity of someone memorizing every detail, as though afraid she might disappear if he looked away. "What did Lord Crimson mean?" Eleanor asked between bites. "When he said the Covenant Blade's manifestation changes everything." "What changes?" Lucian's expression darkened. "The Covenant Blade is legendary. Most modern vampires think it's myth, a story from the old days, before rational thought and written contracts. Seeing it manifest proves that the ancient magic still exist, still respond to genuine need." He leaned back against the wall. "That makes you valuable, Eleanor, not just to me or to Thornhaven, but to every vampire who remembers the old ways. Some will want to study you. Others will want to bind you. And some," he paused, "some will want to destroy you, because you represent a power they can't control. So winning the duel just painted a target on my back. A larger one than before. Yes." He reached out to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear. "But you also proved you can defend yourself. That buys respect, even from those who'd rather see you dead. In vampire politics, respect is often more valuable than love." Eleanor finished eating and set aside the plate, feeling marginally stronger. "Teach me more," she said. "About vampire politics, about the other houses, about everything I'll need to know to survive in this new world I've stumbled into. Eleanor, you need to rest. I'll rest when I understand what I'm facing." She fixed him with a determined stare. "Lucian, I can't afford ignorance anymore. Every gap in my knowledge is a vulnerability someone can exploit. So please, teach me." He studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Very well, but you'll tell me immediately if you start feeling worse. Deal." For the next several hours, Lucian spoke of the vampire world, the major houses, and their specialties, the courts and their hierarchies, the complex web of alliances and enmities that stretched back millennia. He told her of the witnesses, ancient beings who served as arbiters of cosmic law, and the compact that governed interactions between mortal and immortal realms. "The witnesses don't interfere directly," he explained, "but they observe, they judge, and when cosmic law is broken badly enough, they enforce consequences that even elder vampires fear." His silver eyes found hers. The witness who appeared to us gave us until winter solstice to prove mortal-immortal partnership could work. That deadline still stands. How? Long until winter solstice? 6 weeks. He moved to the window, watching the pre-dawn sky begin to pale. 6 weeks to stabilize the boundary completely, to manage your addiction, and to demonstrate that our bond strengthens rather than weakens the covenant. His jaw tightened. And to do all of it while knowing that House Crimson has withdrawn but not surrendered. They'll honor the 50-year agreement, but they'll also spend that time looking for loopholes, ways to claim Thornhaven without technically breaking their oath. Then we use the 6 weeks to prepare. Eleanor threw off the blankets, testing her strength. Her body still ached, but it responded better than before. To train, to build alliances, to become strong enough that when they come back, we're ready. Eleanor, don't tell me to rest. She stood on shaky legs, gripping the bedpost for support. I've rested for 3 days. Now I need to rebuild what the magic consumed. And the only way to do that is to push forward. Lucian crossed to her in 3 strides, steadying her with hands that were infinitely gentle despite their strength. You're extraordinary, you know that? Stubborn and reckless and absolutely extraordinary. I learned from the best. She leaned into him, letting his cold anchor her warmth. A certain vampire lord who taught me that sometimes the only way forward is to refuse to fall. He kissed the top of her head, and through their bond, Eleanor felt his emotions in crystal clarity. Fear for her safety, pride in her strength, love so deep it bordered on worship, and underneath it all, a desperate hope that they might actually survive what was coming. 6 weeks, he murmured against her hair. We have 6 weeks to accomplish the impossible. Good thing we're getting practice at that, Eleanor replied. Dawnlight crept through the window, touching Lucian's skin and making him flinch slightly. He'd stayed with her through the night despite the approaching sun, and now he paid the price, his skin beginning to redden where light touched it. Go, Eleanor urged. Sleep through the day. I'll be here when you wake. Promise? I promise. She pressed a kiss to his cool lips. I'm not going anywhere. We have work to do. He held her a moment longer, as though reluctant to release her. Then shadow wrapped around him, and he dissolved into darkness, retreating to whatever sanctuary he'd claimed for daylight hours. Eleanor stood alone in the rising sun, feeling the boundary hum around her, feeling Lucian's presence through their bond even in his absence, feeling the weight of everything they'd accomplished and everything still to come. 5 years of her life, traded for 50 years of protection. A bond that might consume her, or might save them both. 6 weeks to prove that love could bridge the gap between mortal and immortal. She looked down at her aged hands, at the silver scar that marked her covenant with the boundary, at the carved figures on her nightstand showing her and Lucian standing together against the dark. No pressure, she muttered to herself, then couldn't help but smile. Outside, Thornhaven stirred to life, people beginning their day, unaware of the battles fought in shadow for their sake. Children played in streets, their laughter drifting through the morning air. Life continued, ordinary and beautiful and worth defending. Eleanor moved to her grandmother's bookshelf, pulling down volumes on herbs and healing and ancient lore. If she only had 6 weeks, she'd make every hour count. The war wasn't over, it had only just begun. But for the first time since her grandmother's death, Eleanor Ashford felt like she was exactly where she belonged, standing at the boundary between worlds, armed with magic and love and stubborn determination. Let the vampires come. Let the witnesses judge. Let winter arrive with all its challenges. She would be ready. They both would. Together. The discovery came on the 7th day of Eleanor's recovery. She'd been cataloging her grandmother's books, searching for references to the Covenant Blade or methods to manage blood addiction, when a journal fell from behind a false panel in the bookshelf. The leather binding was ancient, cracked with age, and the pages within were covered in handwriting she recognized instantly. Her grandmother's, but younger, less steady, the script of someone still learning to control their pen. Eleanor carried the journal to the table, hands trembling as she opened to the first page. My name is Margaret Ashford, and I am 17 years old. Today, I renewed the covenant with Lord Blackthorn's predecessor, Lord Sebastian Nightshade. Today, I bound my fate to a vampire's. Eleanor's breath caught. Her grandmother had been a covenant keeper too, had stood where Eleanor stood, had bled on the same stones, had faced the same impossible choices. She read on, devouring page after page. Sebastian is beautiful and terrible in equal measure. When he looks at me, I feel seen in a way I've never experienced. Not as a girl, not as a healer's apprentice, but as an equal. As someone worthy of partnership despite the centuries between us. The village doesn't understand. They see only the monster who drinks blood and walks in shadow. They don't see the man who weeps for those he couldn't save, who bears the weight of protection like a crown of thorns, who has given up everything, even the possibility of love for the sake of duty. But I see him. All of him. And God help me, I think I'm falling in love. The entries continued, chronicling a relationship that mirrored Eleanor's own with painful precision. Margaret and Sebastian training together, fighting together, learning to trust despite the fundamental differences between mortal and immortal. And then, halfway through the journal, a shift. I am pregnant. Eleanor's hands went numb. She reread the line 3 times, certain she'd misunderstood. But no, there it was, written in her grandmother's careful script. Sebastian says it's impossible. Vampires cannot create life, they are death-given form, sterile by their very nature. But I feel the child growing within me nonetheless. A daughter, I think, born of impossibility, gestating in the space between mortal and immortal. Sebastian is terrified. He thinks the child will be monstrous, cursed by his nature, but I know better. I feel her moving, feel her warmth. Whatever she is mine, ours, a bridge between worlds we never expected to build. Eleanor had to set the journal down, mind reeling. Her grandmother had been pregnant with a vampire's child, which meant Eleanor's mother had been, what, half vampire? Something other than entirely human? She forced herself to keep reading. Margaret died in childbirth. The labor was too much for a mortal body carrying an immortal child. Sebastian held our daughter so small, so perfect, and wept tears of blood. Then he gave her to my sister to raise, made her, promised to tell the child nothing of her true heritage, and walked into the sunrise. Lord Lucian Blackthorn arrived 3 days later to take up the covenant. Young for a vampire, barely 3 centuries old, but determined to honor his predecessor's sacrifice. He asked about Sebastian's fate. I told him the truth. He said nothing, but I saw recognition in his silver eyes. He understood what it meant to lose everything for duty. I watch my daughter grow in secret, visiting when I can without revealing our connection. She has Sebastian's silver eyes, though they warm to hazel in sunlight. She has his strength, though it manifests as mortal vitality rather than supernatural power. And she has my gift for healing, amplified beyond what any purely human child should possess. She will never know what she is, but I will ensure she survives long enough to choose her own path. That is the gift I can give her choice. The one thing Sebastian and I were never truly afforded. The journal ended. There, the remaining pages blank. Eleanor sat in stunned silence, trying to process what she'd learned. Her mother had been half vampire, which meant Eleanor herself carried vampire blood dormant, perhaps, but present. That explained so much. Why the Boundaries magic responded to her so strongly. Why Lucian's blood had bonded with her so completely. Why she'd been able to manifest the Covenant blade. She wasn't just a mortal who'd stumbled into vampire politics. She was part vampire herself. The door opened. Lucian stepped through, returned from his day's rest, and froze when he saw the journal on the table. Where did you find that? His voice was carefully neutral, but Eleanor felt his tension through their bond. Behind a false panel, she met his eyes. You knew, didn't you? You knew what my mother was, what I am. Lucian closed his eyes briefly, jaw tightening. I suspected. Your grandmother made me promise never to tell you directly. She wanted you to discover it yourself, if you ever needed to. But yes, I recognize signs. The way the Boundary responded to you, the ease with which you learned magic that should have taken years to master. He moved to the table, touching the journal with something like reverence. Sebastian was my mentor. He taught me everything about maintaining the Covenant before he trailed off. Before he walked into the sunrise because my grandmother died. Eleanor's voice was hollow. He trailed off. That's what you meant about your predecessor and his mortal partner being bound until death. When she died, he couldn't survive the loss. The bond between them was different than ours, deeper. They'd been together for 30 years, had created a child together, something no one thought possible. When Margaret died, Sebastian felt it as though he'd been torn in half. Lucian sat across from Eleanor, his expression distant with memory. I found him on the eastern boundary at dawn. He said, "Take care of them. The village, the child, the covenant. Promise me." I promised. Then he walked into the light, and he smiled, as though dying was relief. Eleanor reached across the table, taking Lucian's cold hand in hers. "Is that what you're afraid of? That our bond will deepen until losing me becomes unendurable?" "Every day." His silver eyes found hers, raw with honesty. "Every moment I'm with you, I feel the bond strengthening, not just magically, but emotionally. You're becoming essential, Eleanor. Not like breathing I don't breathe, but like purpose itself. And I'm terrified that when your mortality finally claims you, I'll follow Sebastian into the sunrise because existing without you will be unbearable. Then we find a way to prevent that." Eleanor squeezed his hand. "You said there are ways to extend mortal life without becoming twisted. My grandmother's journal might contain clues. And I'm not entirely mortal anymore. Maybe my vampire heritage can be awakened. Give me more time. Awakening dormant vampire blood requires drinking from an elder vampire until the transformation completes." Lucian's voice was strained. It would mean dying and being reborn as something between human and vampire. A dhampir, technically not fully either species, but carrying traits of both. Would I age? Slower than mortals. A dhampir can live several centuries if careful. He stood abruptly, pacing. "But Eleanor, the transformation is agonizing. Your body would fight itself, mortal nature warring with immortal. Many dhampirs go mad during the change, and even if you survived, you'd never be fully human again. You'd crave blood, need it to maintain your strength. You'd become dependent on regular feeding in ways that make your current addiction look mild. But I'd have centuries." Eleanor stood too, moving to block his pacing. "Centuries with you. Isn't that worth the cost?" "I don't know." His voice broke. "I don't know if watching you suffer through transformation, knowing I caused it, is something I could bear. I don't know if centuries together is worth you losing your humanity. I don't—" He pulled her against him suddenly, desperately. "I don't know anything anymore except that I love you and I'm terrified of every choice ahead of us." Eleanor held him tightly, feeling his fear through their bond, feeling her own uncertainty mixing with his. "We don't have to decide now. We have time to think, to research, to find the best path forward. We have 6 weeks until the witness judges us," Lucian reminded her, "and 50 years until House Crimson returns. That seems like time, but for questions this fundamental." He pulled back to cup her face. "I want you to have a full life, Eleanor. Not just existence stretching into eternity, but genuine living. Joy and purpose and choices made freely, not forced by circumstance or fear of losing each other. Then help me live fully now." Eleanor rose on her toes to kiss him softly. "Teach me everything you know. Let me experience the world, through your eyes. Show me what centuries have taught you, so that whether I have decades or centuries ahead, I spend them wisely." Before Lucian could respond, a knock at the door interrupted them. Not gentle like the villagers, harsh, demanding. Lucian tensed, positioning himself between Eleanor and the door. "Who is it?" "Lady Morgana of House Silver." The voice was female, cultured, carrying authority. "I seek audience with Eleanor Ashford, the Covenant Keeper who manifested the blade. I come with information Lord Blackthorn will find." Illuminating. Eleanor and Lucian exchanged glances. House Silver was neutral in most vampire politics, neither ally nor enemy to the Winter Court. "It could be a trap," Lucian murmured. "Or it could be the ally we've been hoping for." Eleanor moved toward the door, despite his protective stance. "We need information, Lucian. Let's hear what she has to say." Reluctantly, Lucian opened the door. The woman who entered was striking tall and regal, with skin like alabaster and hair that shimmered between silver and white depending on the light. Her eyes were the pale blue of winter ice, and she wore robes that seemed woven from moonlight itself. Power radiated from her, old and refined. "Lord Blackthorn," she inclined her head respectfully, "and Miss Ashford, thank you for receiving me." Her gaze swept the cottage, lingering on the journal still open on the table. "I see you've discovered Margaret's legacy. Good. That will make this conversation easier." "What do you want?" Lucian's voice was hard, protective. "To offer alliance." Lady Morgana moved gracefully to the table, studying the journal without touching it. "House Silver remembers the old covenants. We remember when vampire and human worked in partnership rather than predator and prey. And we remember Sebastian Nightshade, he was my student once, centuries ago. Her ice blue eyes found Eleanor's. I taught him the magic that allowed him to father a child with your grandmother. Magic thought lost, but clearly not entirely. Eleanor's breath caught. You can teach me how to awaken my vampire heritage? How to transform safely? I can teach you many things. Lady Morgana smiled, though it didn't reach her eyes. But knowledge always comes with price. And the price I ask is this. When you complete your transformation, you will owe House Silver a debt. One favor, to be called upon when we choose. Absolutely not. Lucien's voice was flat with refusal. Eleanor doesn't make open-ended bargains with vampires, especially not ones as politically savvy as you. Then enjoy your brief time together, Lady Morgana said without rancor. Eleanor will age and die within decades. You'll walk into the sunrise as Sebastian did. And the boundary will collapse again, requiring another century to rebuild if anyone bothers. She turned toward the door. But if you change your minds, you know how to reach House Silver. We'll be watching with great interest to see how this plays out. Wait. Eleanor spoke before Lucien could stop her. What kind of favor? What would you ask of me? Lady Morgana paused, her expression calculating. I don't know yet, but when I do know, I'll call upon you to repay the debt. It won't be anything that violates your core principles. We don't ask covenant keepers to break their own vows. But it will be significant, worth the knowledge I'm offering. Eleanor, no, Lucien began. I need to think about it. Eleanor held up her hand, forestalling both vampires. Give me until the new moon. Then I'll give you my answer. Lady Morgana's smile grew slightly warmer. Fair enough. You're wiser than I expected, Eleanor Ashford. Sebastian would have been proud. She moved to the door with liquid grace. Until the new moon, then. Oh, and Lord Blackthorn? She glanced back. The witnesses aren't the only ones observing your experiment. There are factions within multiple houses who believe the old ways can be revived. Prove them right, and you'll have more allies than you realize. Then she was gone, dissolving into shadow, leaving only the faint scent of winter roses in her wake. Lucien immediately turned to Eleanor, expression torn between fury and fear. You can't seriously be considering her offer. Open-ended debts to elder vampires are dangerous. I know. Eleanor moved to the window, staring out at the boundary line glowing faintly in the darkness. But Lucien, what's more dangerous? Making a bargain that might cost me one significant favor, or dying in 40 years and leaving you to follow Sebastian's path? There has to be another way. If there is, we have until the new moon to find it. She turned to face him. But if we don't find an alternative, if Lady Morgana's knowledge is the only path to giving us centuries together instead of decades. She took a deep breath. I think the risk might be worth it. Lucien crossed to her, pulling her into his arms. Through their bond, she felt his turmoil, hatred of the choice, understanding of her reasoning, and underneath it all, desperate hope that maybe, impossibly, they could find a way to be together that didn't require selling pieces of themselves to elder powers. 3 weeks, he murmured against her hair. We have 3 weeks until the new moon. We'll spend every hour searching for alternatives, and if we find nothing, he pulled back to meet her eyes. We'll make the decision together, no matter what. Together, Eleanor agreed. They stood wrapped in each other's arms as night deepened around them, the journal on the table bearing witness to a love that had ended in tragedy, and the knowledge that their own love might be walking the same perilous path. But they had 3 weeks. 3 weeks to find a better way, or to make peace with the bargain that might be their only option. 3 weeks to decide how much they were willing to sacrifice for the possibility of forever. Outside, the boundary hummed with renewed strength, fed by the Covenant Blade's manifestation. In the village, people slept peacefully, unaware of the impossible choices being made on their behalf. And in the shadows beyond the boundary, Lady Morgana smiled, already counting the debt she would claim when desperation forced the Covenant Keeper's hand. The game was far from over. It had only just become interesting. Eleanor looked up at Lucien, seeing her own determination reflected in his silver eyes, and made a silent vow. Whatever came next, transformation or tragedy, bargains or breakthroughs, they would face it as they'd faced everything else. Together. And maybe, just maybe, that would be enough. 3 weeks passed in a blur of desperate research and discovery. Eleanor and Lucian scoured every text in her grandmother's collection, searching for alternatives to Lady Morgana's offer. They found references to life extension rituals, to magical bindings that could slow aging, to rare herbs that granted years of vitality. But each solution came with its own terrible price: pieces of humanity traded for time, sanity risked for longevity, or dependencies worse than Eleanor's current craving for Lucian's blood. The new moon came and went. Eleanor sent word to Lady Morgana. "Not yet. Give us until winter solstice." The vampire had laughed a sound like silver bells and shattering ice and agreed. "Very well, Covenant Keeper. Until the longest night. After that, my offer expires, and you face your mortality alone." Now, as the winter solstice approached, Eleanor stood at the boundary's edge, watching the first snow of the season fall like frozen tears. Her breath misted in the cold air, a reminder of her living warmth in a world increasingly populated by the cold and deathless. Behind her, the cottage glowed with candlelight. Inside, Lucian waited with the results of their final research, a ritual they'd found buried in the oldest texts, written in languages that predated kingdoms. A third option, beyond transformation or mortality. But first, Eleanor needed this moment, this silence, this chance to feel the weight of her choice before making it. "You're going to catch cold." She turned to find Lucian approaching, wrapped in his black coat, carrying a thick cloak for her. He draped it over her shoulders with gentle hands, then stood beside her, both of them watching snow accumulate on the boundary stones. "I've been thinking," Eleanor said quietly, "about what it means to be human, to be mortal." She held out her hand, catching snowflakes that melted instantly against her skin. "We spend our whole lives running from death, trying to delay it, deny it, pretend it won't come for us. But maybe—" She closed her hand around the vanished snow. "Maybe mortality's gift isn't time but urgency. The knowledge that every moment matters because we have so few of them. And if you had centuries?" Lucian's voice was careful. "Would moments still matter, or would they blur together, into one endless present?" "I don't know." Eleanor turned to face him. "That's what terrifies me about transformation. Not the pain, not the blood craving, but the possibility that I'd stop seeing beauty in temporary things, that I'd become so focused on eternity that I'd forget how to live in the now." Lucian was silent for a long moment, snow catching in his dark hair like stars. "Sebastian told me something, the night before he died. He said, 'I've lived 3,000 years, Lucian, but I've only truly lived for 30 the years I spent with Margaret. Everything before her was just existence, time passing without meaning.' He looked at me with such clarity and said, 'If you ever find what makes existence transform into living, hold on to it with everything you have, because that's worth more than all the centuries in the world.'" Eleanor felt tears burning in her eyes. "You think he was right to walk into the sunrise?" "I think he chose what mattered most to him." Lucian touched her face, brushing away a tear with his thumb. "And I think, whatever you choose tonight, I'll support it. Even if—" His voice roughened. "Even if you choose mortality, even if you choose to live your natural span and leave me behind, I'll support it, because your freedom to choose is more important than my fear of losing you." "Show me the ritual," Eleanor said. "The third option. Then I'll decide." They returned to the cottage, where Lucian had laid out the ancient texts on the kitchen table. The ritual was written in 3 languages, with illuminations showing a woman standing at the center of a circle, hands raised, while light and shadow intertwined around her. "It's called the balance of liminality," Lucian explained, his voice taking on the cadence of a lecturer. "It doesn't grant immortality or transform you into Doorstep. Instead, it freezes you, locks your physical form at its current state while allowing your consciousness to continue evolving." Eleanor studied the text, her enhanced senses picking out details. "I wouldn't age?" "No, but you also wouldn't be truly immortal. You could still be killed by violence, disease, or magic. You'd simply stop progressing toward natural death." He pointed to a passage. "The ritual requires 3 participants, the one being frozen, a vampire to provide the immortal anchor, and a mortal to provide the living anchor. It creates a state of perpetual becoming, not alive or dead, not mortal or immortal, but suspended between." "What's the cost?" Lucian's jaw tightened. "You'd be bound to both anchors for as long as the spell holds. If either anchor dies, you begin aging again at an accelerated rate, living the years you'd skipped in the span of days." And he hesitated. The ritual requires absolute trust. Any doubt, any reservation from any of the 3 participants, and the magic fails catastrophically. You'd burn through your remaining life in an instant. Eleanor absorbed this, mind working through. Implications. Who would be the mortal anchor? I was hoping Alice Miller might consent. She's young, healthy, and she owes you her life. The anchor doesn't require much, just a willing connection, renewed annually with a simple ceremony. He met her eyes. But Eleanor, you need to understand, this isn't a perfect solution. It's a compromise. You'd exist in a state of suspension, never fully one thing or another. Some who've undergone similar rituals describe it as feeling hollow, as though they're observing life rather than living it. But I'd have time, Eleanor said slowly. Time to continue the covenant, time with you, time to make a real difference instead of burning out in 40 years. Yes. Lucien's voice was strained. But at what cost to your humanity? To your sense of self? Eleanor moved to the window, watching snow fall in the darkness beyond. She thought of her grandmother, who'd lived fully and died young, leaving behind a legacy of healing and love. She thought of Sebastian, who'd chosen death over existence without meaning. She thought of Lady Morgana's offer power and time, but purchased with an open-ended debt that could consume her freedom. And she thought of Lucien, standing behind her, willing to support whatever choice she made even if it destroyed him. I need to talk to Alice, Eleanor said finally. If she agrees to be the mortal anchor, if she understands what I'm asking, then I'll do the ritual. Not because I fear death, but because I choose to continue living. On my terms. With you. Relief and fear warred in Lucien's expression. Are you certain? No. Eleanor turned to face him. But I'm certain that I love you. And I'm certain that the work we're doing protecting the boundary, proving mortal and immortal, can coexist matters more than my individual mortality. If this ritual gives us the time we need to see that work through. She took his hands. Then it's worth the risk. Alice Miller arrived at sunset, her mother, hovering protectively in the background. The girl was 14 now, stronger after her ordeal in the Court of Mirrors, with eyes that held knowledge no child should possess. Eleanor explained the ritual carefully, holding nothing back: the requirements, the risks, the binding that would connect them for as long as the spell held. If you die, Eleanor said bluntly, I age rapidly and die shortly after. You'd be tying your fate to mine, Alice. That's not a small thing to ask. Alice was quiet for a long moment, turning the carved figure over in her hands, the one she'd made, showing Eleanor and Lucien standing together. Then she looked up, and her expression was far older than her years. You saved my life, Alice said simply. You fought a monster for me and 16 other children. You aged yourself protecting all of us. She set down the carving. If being your anchor means you can keep protecting people, keep standing at the boundary between us and things that want to hurt us, then yes, I'll do it. Gladly. Sarah Miller made a sound of protest, but Alice turned to her mother. Mama, this is important. Miss Ashford is important. And maybe, the girl's voice grew softer, maybe this is my way of fighting back, of taking something terrible that happened to me and turning it into something good. Sarah looked at her daughter for a long moment, then at Eleanor, then back to Alice. Finally, she nodded. If this is what you choose, I won't stop you. But, her voice hardened with maternal protectiveness, if anything happens to my daughter because of this ritual, covenant or no covenant, I'll find a way to make you pay. Fair enough, Eleanor said, respecting the threat more than she'd respect blind agreement. The ritual was set for midnight on the winter solstice, the longest night of the year, when the boundary between mortal and immortal was thinnest, when magic answered most readily to those who called. As darkness fell on the solstice, Eleanor stood in, the center of the ancient stone circle, where she'd first renewed the covenant. Lucien stood to her right, Alice to her left, forming a triangle. The witness materialized at the circle's edge, observing in silent judgment. Before we begin, the witness intoned, its voice echoing from nowhere and everywhere. Understand what you attempt. The balance of liminality has been performed 17 times in recorded history. 8 succeeded. 9 failed catastrophically, consuming all participants in magical fire. We understand, Eleanor said steadily. Do you? The witness drifted closer, and Eleanor felt its attention like a weight. Eleanor Ashford, you choose to suspend your natural mortality, to exist in the space between life and death. This is neither transformation nor immortality, but stasis. You will not grow. You will not change. You will be frozen at this moment for as long as the magic holds. Are you prepared for that existence? Eleanor thought of her grandmother's words. Every tale has roots. Every superstition grew from seed of truth. She thought of the covenant blade, born from absolute need and unwavering purpose. She thought of Lucian's eyes watching her, silver and ancient and full of desperate hope. I am prepared, she said. Lucian Blackthorn. The witness turned to him. You bind yourself as a mortal anchor, tying your power to her suspended state. Should you be destroyed, she ages. Should you betray the bond, she ages. Should you falter in your commitment, she ages. Can you maintain this binding for decades, centuries, millennia? I can, Lucian said without hesitation. I will. Alice Miller. The witness's attention fell on the girl, and she stood taller under its regard. You are young. You have a full life ahead of you. Yet you choose to tie your fate to another's, to become an anchor for magic you barely understand. Why? Alice lifted her chin. Because Miss Ashford showed me that courage isn't about never being afraid. It's about choosing to help anyway. And if me being her anchor means she can keep helping people, keep protecting us, then I choose this. I choose to be part of something important. The witness was silent for a long moment. Then, impossibly, it laughed a sound like wind through ancient tombs, but not entirely without warmth. Very well. The compact finds your intentions pure, if foolhardy. Proceed with the ritual. But know this, its voice grew grave. Success or failure, this night will echo through both mortal and immortal realms. What you do here sets precedent. Others will follow, or they will use your failure as proof that such bridges should never be built. Choose your actions carefully. Then the witness withdrew to the circle's edge, watching. Lucian began the ritual, speaking in languages that predated civilization, drawing power from his immortal essence and channeling it through the boundary stones. Light, cold, and blue began to gather around the circle. Alice spoke next, her young voice clear and certain, calling on the vitality of youth and the promise of years yet unlived. Warmth, golden and soft, joined the cold light, intertwining. Eleanor felt both energies reaching for her, felt them trying to anchor in her flesh and blood and bone. She opened herself to them, letting go of resistance, and spoke her own part of the ritual. I stand at the boundary between breath and stillness, between temporary and eternal. I choose neither mortality nor immortality, but the space between. I choose to serve the covenant for as long as I can, to stand beside those I love for as long as magic allows, to exist in balance. The energies converged, cold and warm, immortal and mortal, crashing into Eleanor with force that drove her to her knees. She felt her body fighting cells screaming in confusion, mortality raging against the suspension, life itself trying to reject the unnatural stasis. This is wrong, her biology insisted. You're supposed to age, to change, to die. Not yet, Eleanor thought back fiercely. Not until I'm finished. Not until the work is done. She felt Lucian's presence flooding through their bond, felt him pouring centuries of power into stabilizing her form. She felt Alice's young vitality anchoring her to the living world, preventing her from slipping entirely into immortal coldness. And underneath both, she felt the boundary itself responding, recognizing this act as an extension of the covenant, a guardian choosing to exist in service longer than nature intended. The pain crescendoed, and for one terrible moment Eleanor thought she would fail, thought she would burn through her remaining life in an instant, leaving Lucian and Alice to witness her destruction. Then something shifted. The warring energies found equilibrium. Cold and warm balanced. Immortal and mortal merged into something new, not Dhampir, not vampire, not human, but liminal. Suspended, frozen at the edge of becoming. Eleanor gasped, opening eyes she didn't remember closing. The world looked different, sharper in some ways, softer in others. She could see individual snowflakes falling, could trace their unique crystalline patterns even in darkness. But when she looked at the trees beyond the circle, they seemed somehow distant, as though she was viewing them through glass. How do you feel? Lucian's voice was tight with concern. Eleanor took inventory. Her body felt strange, present but not entirely there. She could sense her heartbeat, but it seemed far away, as though her heart beat in some other room and she merely heard echoes. When she breathed, it was more from habit than need. Hollow, she said finally, Like I'm still here, but the here I'm occupying isn't quite real. That's normal, Lucian said, though his expression suggested nothing about this was normal. The suspension creates distance between your consciousness and your physical form. It will feel less disorienting with time. Alice approached cautiously. Did it work? Are we bound? Eleanor reached out through the new connections. She could feel threads of magic linking her to both Lucian and Alice, tying their fates together. Through Lucian's thread, she felt his ancient power, steady as mountains. Through Alice's, she felt youthful vitality, bright as summer. Yes, Eleanor said. We're bound, all three of us. The witness materialized before them, regarding Eleanor with what might have been approval. The ritual succeeds. Eleanor Ashford exists now in liminal space, anchored by immortal cold and mortal warmth. You have until your natural death would have occurred approximately 42 years to prove this state sustainable. If you maintain balance for that duration, the compact will consider the suspension permanent. Its hidden gaze swept all three, but understand any imbalance, any severing of the anchors, and the magic fails. Guard each other well. Then it dissolved, its judgment delivered. Eleanor stood on, shaking legs, supported by Lucian's arm. The ritual had drained her more than she expected. She felt exhausted in a way that went beyond physical tiredness, soul-deep weariness, as though she'd run a marathon that existed in dimensions beyond the physical. Come, Lucian murmured. You need rest. Your body may not age, but it still requires restoration after such magic. He helped her back to the cottage while Alice and her mother returned to the village. Eleanor collapsed on her bed, every part of her aching with the echo of what she'd endured. Did I make the right choice? She asked, as Lucian sat beside her. I don't know, he said honestly. Ask me in 42 years, when we see whether the suspension becomes permanent, or whether you resume aging. His hand found hers. But Eleanor, whatever comes, whatever price this magic eventually demands, you chose it freely. That matters. Freely? Eleanor laughed weakly. I chose between dying in 40 years, becoming a Dhampir through agonizing transformation, or suspending myself in this hollow state. Those aren't exactly free choices. Weren't they? Lucian brushed hair back from her face. You could have chosen to live your natural span, to age and die as humans do, leaving me to face the consequences. That was always an option. You chose instead to find a way for us to continue together. That's not compulsion, Eleanor. That's love. Eleanor closed her eyes, feeling the strange distance between her consciousness and her body. Will it always feel like this? Like I'm observing myself from outside? Sebastian's text suggests the sensation fades with time. You'll adapt. Humans are remarkably good at adapting. His thumb traced circles on her wrist. But if you can't adapt, if the hollowness becomes unbearable, tell me. We'll find another way. Another way to what? To give us time? Eleanor opened her eyes. Lucian, we made this choice. We bound ourselves, all three of us, to this magic. We can't simply unmake it because it feels uncomfortable. Then we learn to live with discomfort. He leaned down to kiss her forehead. Together. Eleanor pulled him closer, needing his presence even if her suspended state meant she barely felt his coldness anymore. Through their bond, she sensed his fear, terror that he'd pushed her into this, that she'd regret the choice, that the hollow feeling would consume her until nothing remained but an empty shell wearing her face. I don't regret it, she said aloud. The choice, the binding, any of it. She met his silver eyes. I regret that these were our only options, but given those options, I'd choose this again. I'd choose us again. His expression crumbled relief and love and lingering fear all tangled together. He kissed her then, desperately, as though trying to prove through contact that she was still real, still present, still her despite the magic that now suspended her natural processes. Eleanor kissed him back, and though sensation felt muted compared to before, the emotion behind it burned just as fiercely. Love didn't require perfect physical presence to be real. It required choice, commitment, and the stubborn refusal to let impossible circumstances define the boundaries of what was possible. They lay together as dawn approached, wrapped in each other despite the fundamental differences between them. Him cold and immortal, her suspended and hollow, both of them choosing connection over the easier path of solitude. Thank you, Lucian whispered as the first light touched the horizon. For choosing to stay. For choosing me. For being brave enough to walk this impossible path. Thank you, Eleanor whispered back. For showing me that monsters and humans aren't opposites, just different points on the same spectrum. For teaching me that love is worth any price. For being exactly what I needed, even when I didn't know I needed it. The sun rose on the winter solstice, light spilling across snow-covered ground, touching the boundary stones and making them gleam. Eleanor watched through the window, seeing her first dawn as a liminal being no longer purely mortal, not yet truly immortal, but suspended in the space between. It felt right, she realized. This half-existence, this boundary state. She'd been living at the boundary between worlds for months now. Why not exist there permanently? Outside, Thornhaven stirred to life. People emerged from their homes, unaware of the ritual performed in darkness, unaware that their guardian had chosen to suspend her mortality for their sake. Life continued ordinary, beautiful, worth protecting. Eleanor smiled, feeling purpose settle into her suspended form like bones finding their proper alignment. This was why she'd made the choice, not for immortality, not even for love, but for this. The chance to continue protecting, to continue standing at the boundary, to continue making a difference for as long as magic allowed. 42 years, she said, quietly. If I can maintain balance for 42 years, the suspension becomes permanent. Then we have 42 years to prove that mortal and immortal can exist in harmony, Lucian replied, to demonstrate that the old ways still work, to build something that outlasts both of us. No pressure. He laughed, genuine and warm despite his cold nature. None whatsoever. They stood together watching the dawn, neither speaking, both understanding that this moment marked a beginning rather than an ending. The winter solstice had passed. The longest night was over. Ahead lay years of challenge and change, of proving themselves to the compact and to each other, of learning to exist in suspension without losing themselves to the hollowness. But they would face it together. Guardian and heir, vampire and liminal being, monster and mortal choosing partnership over predation. And maybe, impossibly, that would be enough. 5 years later, Eleanor stood at the eastern boundary as dawn broke, over Thornhaven, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. The hollow feeling had faded, not disappeared, but transformed into something like constant awareness, as though she existed slightly apart from the world while remaining deeply connected to it. Lucian emerged from shadow to stand beside her, his hand finding hers with the ease of long practice. Through their bond stronger now, refined by years of maintaining the suspension, she felt his contentment, his peace. They'd proven the ritual sustainable. 5 years without significant imbalance. 5 years of Eleanor maintaining her suspended state, while continuing her work as covenant keeper and healer. The boundary had never been stronger. Thornhaven had never been safer. And they had never been more certain that they'd chosen correctly. 37 years left, Lucian murmured, watching the sunrise with her. Then the suspension becomes permanent. A lifetime, Eleanor replied. And an instant, both at once. Behind them, Alice Miller approached 19 now, strong and confident, preparing to leave Thornhaven for university in London. The mortal anchor leaving, but not severing the connection. Distance didn't matter to magic built on willing bonds. "Will you be all right?" Alice asked, worry evident despite her excitement. "We'll be fine," Eleanor assured her. "Go, live, learn, become everything you're meant to be. The anchor doesn't require proximity, just the knowledge that we're tied together, choosing this connection." Alice hugged them both, the covenant keeper and the vampire lord, the guardian and the monster, the woman who'd saved her, and the being who'd taught her that fear and respect weren't mutually exclusive, then walked toward her future with steady steps. Eleanor and Lucian watched her go, watched the village wake, watched dawn complete its transformation of night into day. They would stand here tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after that. They would guard the boundary for decades, proving that love could transcend the divide between mortal and immortal. And when dawn broke on that final day, when the suspension became permanent or failed catastrophically, they would face it as they'd faced everything else. Together, in the space between breath and stillness, where roses bloomed black as sin and love defied death itself. At the boundary, where they belonged.